I've spent enough nights under an RV awning to know that truth and legend often share the same campsite. My name's Eli Morton, I'm 47, and I've been full-timing across the US for 6 years now. What began as a retirement dream turned into something deeper, a search for what's real out here. Because every traveler you meet at an RV park has a story, and sometimes those stories sound like they crawled right out of a nightmare. I used to laugh at the tales, the haunted hookups, the vanishing trailers, the whispers of parks that weren't on any map. I thought they were meant to keep newcomers cautious or entertained, just folklore to pass around campfires between beers and bug zaps. But lately, I'm not so sure. My doubt started last summer in a little park off Highway 550 in northern New Mexico. It wasn't on my original route. I'd been heading toward Durango, but a sudden storm rolled in from the mountains, the kind that turns the sky into a bruise. The roads shimmered with lightning. So I pulled off when I saw the hand-painted sign, "Welcome to Sagebrush Hollow RV Park." The sign leaned to one side like it had given up years ago. The gravel road crunched under my tires, and the headlights revealed rows of faded trailers, some missing wheels, some caved in on themselves. The air smelled of ozone and wet dust, and the wind carried something faint, a metallic tang like old coins or blood. The office was dark, but the porch light flickered on as I approached, as if sensing movement. A man stepped out, tall, thin, skin pale as birch bark under the porch bulb. His voice was polite but drained of warmth. "Just you?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Storm came in fast, thought I'd wait it out." He nodded slowly. "Pick any site you like. Power's iffy during weather. Just stay put after dark." That pause before after dark stuck with me. I drove to site number 6, the only one that looked level, and backed in. The rain started hammering the roof before I could plug in. I made some coffee, the old kind you boil on the stove, and watched the lightning flash over the mesas. For a moment, it was beautiful, wild, cleansing. Then, through one flash, I saw something else. A shape between the rows of empty rigs. Human-sized, but it didn't move like a person. It just appeared, then was gone when the next lightning hit. I convinced myself it was a trick of the light, or exhaustion. You can't live on the road and believe every shadow wants to talk to you. But that night, as the rain softened into mist, I heard it. A low humming sound, like a generator trying to start but never quite catching. I stepped outside barefoot, flashlight in hand. The air was cool and heavy, the kind that feels alive. My beam cut through the fog, 1, 2, 3 sights down, and then I froze. The old Airstream in lot number 9 had lights inside, warm, yellow ones. I'd swear it was abandoned earlier. Its door swung slightly open. I should have turned around right then, should have locked up and waited for morning. But curiosity has a scent, sweet, intoxicating, and dangerous when mixed with solitude. I stepped closer. Every footstep sounded too loud, too wet. The hum grew clearer, not mechanical anymore, but human, like someone whispering a single note under their breath. When I reached the Airstream, the humming stopped. The light inside flickered once, then went black. I stood there, waiting for something. A sound, a laugh, anything to break the silence. Instead, I heard a voice behind me. "You're not supposed to see them yet." I turned, heart hammering so hard it felt like my ribs might split. But the fog swallowed everything, even the gravel road, even the porch light from my own rig. There was no one there. I sprinted back to my RV, slammed the door, and locked it. For hours I sat by the window, watching that empty row of trailers until dawn crept in, washing everything pale and harmless again. By morning, the storm had cleared. The park looked different, smaller, emptier. I went to the office to pay and found it open this time. But inside, it was abandoned. Dust covered the counter. Cobwebs hung like curtains. The only thing on the desk was a stack of old registration cards, yellowed with age. The top card had my name on it. That's when I started digging into the stories. See, every region has its legends. The Screaming Pond in Arkansas, the Hookless Man in Oregon, the Campfire Echo in the Rockies. But they all share patterns. A storm, a lost traveler, a place off map, and always a warning about staying out after dark. At first, I thought maybe it was an RV community thing, like an unspoken rule turned myth. But the more I traveled, the more I saw how similar they were. Different parks, same symbols, same language, and sometimes the same faces. In Arizona, I met a woman named Jo at a rest stop outside Winslow. Her Class C looked like it had lived 5 lives. She told me about a park outside of Sedona where she woke to find tire tracks circling her rig, perfectly symmetrical, as if something had driven around her all night. They said it's just coyotes, she laughed nervously, but the tracks were rubber, no footprints, no animals, just circles, like someone studying me. She'd left that morning, driving until the red rocks disappeared in her mirrors. And in Utah, near the Salt Flats, a retired couple showed me a photo they took years ago, a bright streak in the sky above an abandoned RV park. The park's been gone since 2004, burned down, supposedly. But when I checked the coordinates they gave me, Google Maps still showed trailers parked neatly in rows. When I zoomed in, one of them had lights on. You start to wonder, traveling like this, if maybe the legends aren't stories about places. Maybe they are the places. Maybe something out here survives by wearing the shape of an RV park, a familiar comfort, a place that lets you rest just long enough to forget what road you came in on. And maybe the stories we tell each other aren't warnings. Maybe they're breadcrumbs, the last traces of those who made it out. The more I thought about that, the more I realized the danger isn't just in what we see, it's in what we recognize. Because the moment something strange feels familiar, your guard drops. And that's when it happens. The shift. The distortion. It was early fall when I decided to retrace my route through Sagebrush Hollow. I needed proof. I needed to see if the park existed at all. I drove 6 hours through the desert, past cliffs and empty gas stations until the wind picked up that same dry electric edge. The GPS glitched. I expected that. But when I reached where the road should have split toward the park, it didn't. Just an endless stretch of sage and dust. I parked anyway, got out, and started walking. The horizon shimmered in the heat. The silence was so thick it rang in my ears. Then I smelled it again, that metallic tang. And beneath it, faint and almost impossible to notice unless you'd heard it before, a hum. The air trembled. I took one step forward, and for a brief second, the light bent. The road split open. I saw the sign again, crooked, half-buried, letters peeling under the sun. Welcome to Sagebrush Hollow RV Park. Then it was gone. I stood there, dust clinging to my boots, staring at empty space where a road should have been. My hands shook. Not from fear, but from disbelief. The mind hates absence. It wants to fill the void with something. I kept blinking, hoping the park would reappear, that my exhaustion had twisted the air. But there was nothing. Just the sun pressing down like a hand on the back of my neck, and that faint hum fading like a memory. I turned back toward my RV, but the landscape had changed. The mesa looked different, sharper, darker. The light had shifted in a way that didn't make sense. It was as if time had skipped a few frames. My GPS still showed my location as Sagebrush Hollow NM, but there was no service road, no coordinates to follow. Just me, standing in a place that shouldn't exist anymore. When I got back to the highway, I sat behind the wheel for a long while, engine idling, heart still pounding. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. Not yet. I've learned that when you start talking about this kind of thing, people stop hearing you. They hear the words, but they don't listen. They file it away under paranormal nonsense or fatigue-induced visions. So instead, I decided to investigate the way travelers like me have always done. Quietly, carefully, listening between the lines of others' stories. The first lead came from a Facebook group for full-time RVers. Someone posted an old thread about ghost parks. Places that appear only under certain weather conditions, often tied to electrical storms or strong wind currents. Most comments were jokes. Sounds like a cool Netflix pitch, one guy wrote. But buried deep in the replies, I found a woman who claimed she'd seen the same thing. Her name was Mary Carr from Colorado. Her message said she'd stayed at a park near Santa Rosa in 2016 that vanished after she left. She'd tried to return months later but found only desert. I sent her a private message, and to my surprise, she replied almost immediately. Her tone was sharp, direct, like someone tired of being doubted. "If you saw it, you don't need me to explain," she wrote. "But yes, the place was real, and yes, it disappears." She told me the same thing I'd heard before. The hum, the flickering lights, the strange air pressure that makes your ears ring like you're changing altitude. "Don't go looking for it again," she warned. "They notice when you remember." That phrase stuck with me. They notice when you remember. I started tracing park records, old property deeds, anything I could find. But there were gaps. Counties with no listed owner, tax lots frozen for decades. It was like someone or something kept resetting them, erasing the trail every few years. By late autumn, my travels took me north through Utah and into Idaho. The nights grew colder, and the stories followed me. In Twin Falls, a man named Jared at a rest stop approached me after noticing my rig, an old Winnebago with faded decals. "You ever hear about the park that moves?" he asked, smiling like it was a game. I told him I'd heard versions of it, sure. He leaned closer, the smell of gasoline and coffee thick between us. "Nah, this one's real. Get. Folks park there one night, wake up the next, and the exit road's different. Always points east. Doesn't matter where they came in from. Then they drive all day, thinking they're getting out, and end up right back where they started. Same picnic table. Same crooked lamppost." He grinned, showing a chipped tooth. "You don't believe me, but it's true. My cousin's truck's still there. Been there for 2 years now." When I asked where, his face changed. The grin slipped away, and his eyes darted toward the highway like someone was listening. "Don't go looking," he muttered. "If you hear the hum, just drive." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, my rig creaking with the wind, thinking about all those stories. Different voices, different towns, same core truth. And that's when the thought hit me. What if these parks are connected? Not metaphorically, literally, like doorways wearing different disguises. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I used to roll my eyes at this stuff. But when you've driven 40,000 miles across the country and end up seeing the same park sign in 3 different states, you start to question things. The next morning, I packed up and headed east. Not toward a destination, toward a feeling. Something in me said, follow the hum. I kept the radio off, windows cracked, trying to listen for that sound I'd heard back in New Mexico. 2 days later, I found it again. Not the same park, or maybe it was, just wearing another face. This one was called Silver Pines RV Resort, tucked deep into a valley outside of Lander, Wyoming. The air smelled of pine and metal. The office looked newer, painted green, but the layout was identical. Same gravel road, same crooked lamppost, same site number 6. When I stepped out, I noticed the quiet first. Too quiet for a campground. Even the wind seemed muffled, like it had been swallowed by something. There were trailers parked in neat rows, but no movement, no voices, no sound of televisions through thin walls, just that faint, rhythmic hum pulsing under the silence. The man at the counter looked younger this time. Same eyes, though, same pale skin. When he smiled, it didn't reach them. "Just one night?" he asked. I hesitated. "You get many travelers through here?" He shrugged. "Depends on the weather." Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the hills. That night, as the rain began, because it always starts with rain, I set up my camera on the dash. If the park vanished again, I wanted proof. I recorded for hours, watching the footage on my laptop in real time. At 2:43 a.m., I caught it. A flicker at the edge of the screen, the lamppost bending, then straightening. The gravel seemed to ripple like heat mirage waves. The rain stopped mid-drop for half a second, frozen in air. And behind my RV, reflected faintly in the window, I saw movement, not a person. A shape, like something unfolding itself from the fog. Then, in the reflection, I saw me, standing outside. But I hadn't left the rig. The screen glitched, static for 10 seconds. When it cleared, the reflection was gone. Both of them. I turned off the laptop, heart thudding in my throat, and sat in the dark, gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor me to reality. The hum was louder now, vibrating through the metal frame. And I realized something. The hum wasn't coming from the park. It was coming through it. Like a signal, old and steady, moving between places we think are separate. The next morning, everything looked normal again. The rain had stopped, the lamppost stood straight, the sky was clean and blue. But when I checked the footage, the entire night's file was gone. Not corrupted, deleted. All that remained was a single image thumbnail in my recycle bin. A still frame of the Airstream from Sagebrush Hollow. Only this time there was someone standing at its door. Me. I didn't touch my laptop for hours after that. It sat on the table like an artifact from a world I no longer trusted. The image was small, barely a thumbnail, but every time I glanced at it, my stomach tightened. It was me, no question. Same jacket, same slouch, same expression. But the eyes, they were wrong. Too fixed. Too aware of something behind the camera. I finally deleted the file, emptied the trash, and shut the lid. But deleting an image doesn't erase what it makes you remember. That night, I left Silver Pines without looking back. I told myself I was done with the investigation, done chasing shadows and half-truths. I wanted to go back to normal life, if such a thing still existed. I thought maybe if I kept driving, the hum would fade, the static in my head would settle. But it didn't. It followed. Every gas station speaker, every rest stop vending machine, every power pole buzzed with that same low frequency, just below hearing, but deep enough to feel in my chest. The kind of sound you start mistaking for your own pulse. I crossed into Nebraska and parked at a large, well-lit RV park near Kearney. Modern, busy, safe. The kind with kids riding bikes and couples grilling steaks beside shiny fifth wheels. Normal life. Civilization. But that night, even among all that noise and laughter, I felt it creeping back, that sense of being watched by something that doesn't blink. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up to tapping on the side of my rig. Not pounding, not scratching, just tapping. 3 short knocks, then silence. I froze, holding my breath. The tapping came again, same rhythm, same distance. I thought maybe it was tree branches in the wind, until I realized there were no trees near my sight. I reached for my flashlight and eased toward the blinds. Through the narrow slit, I saw a figure standing by the electrical hookup box. A man, or something shaped like one. He wasn't moving, not even breathing, from what I could see. The beam from the neighboring RV's porch light caught his face, and my heart seized. It was my face, not a reflection, not a trick of glass. He was outside, looking at my door. I stumbled backward, knocking over a mug. The sound broke the silence, and in that same instant, the figure tilted its head slightly, as if listening. Then it turned and walked away, not toward the exit, but behind the other RVs, vanishing into the night. When dawn came, I packed up and left without even dumping the tanks. I didn't stop driving for 12 hours. Somewhere near Kansas City, exhaustion won. I pulled into a rest area, turned off the engine, and sat there shaking, staring at the steering wheel. That was when I noticed something on my windshield. A faint ring of dirt, perfect and symmetrical like the outline of a hand pressed from the outside. I touched the glass. It was warm. That's when I knew this wasn't just about haunted parks. It was about pattern recognition. Something wants to be noticed, but only by certain people. And once you notice, you can't unsee it. I started keeping a log, not of parks, but of replications. The way certain details repeat, the crooked lamppost, the number 6 painted on a sightpost, the metallic scent in the rain, the hum beneath silence. I mapped them across the country, New Mexico, Wyoming, Idaho, Colorado, even as far east as Kentucky. Each time, a new park, different name, same bones. And then I found something else, something that made me wish I'd never started. In an old RV forum archive from 2009, I found a thread about a park near Glacier National Park called The Pines at Hollow Ridge. The poster, username Trail Echo, described staying there one night during a thunderstorm. They mentioned the hum, the flickering lights, and the part that made my chest tighten, a man at the office who said, "Stay put after dark." Same words, same phrasing. The thread ended abruptly. The account was deleted 2 days later. But the last comment on the thread from another user said something chilling. Open quote, "I knew Eli. He wasn't lying. I stayed there too. The place moved." Close quote. Eli, my name. Different last name, maybe. But still, Eli. I sat there in silence, scrolling through the replies that no longer existed, my pulse roaring in my ears. Someone out there had written my name 15 years before I ever set foot in Sagebrush Hollow, before I even bought my RV. That's when I stopped believing these stories were just folklore. Maybe they're a loop, a kind of echo repeating itself through travelers like me, each one catching a piece of the last. The problem is, what happens when the echo recognizes you back? I didn't want to test that theory. I avoided remote parks for weeks, sticking to chain campgrounds, big lots, crowds. I told myself I was safe. I even started sleeping again. Not well, but enough. Until I got an email. No subject line, no sender listed. Just a timestamp, 2:43 a.m. The same minute I saw the reflection in my video. I almost deleted it without opening, but curiosity has a way of dragging you toward the things you fear most. The message contained one sentence, open quote, "You left the door open, Eli," close quote, and an attachment. It was a video, no sound, low quality, but unmistakably real. My RV parked at a site with the number 6. The camera panned slowly until it faced the open door. Inside, I could see movement, a shadow, and then my own voice whispering, "Don't forget to close it this time." I slammed the laptop shut so hard it cracked the hinge. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat, staring at the door of my rig, waiting for something to move. By morning, the email was gone. Not just deleted, erased from my entire inbox history. No trace of it on the server. That's when I realized maybe these places aren't just traps for travelers. Maybe they're archives, collecting versions of us, recording the way we react to fear, to patterns, to ourselves. Maybe the legends persist because each generation keeps adding their echo to the loop. And maybe I wasn't investigating stories anymore. Maybe I'd become one. A few weeks later, while camped outside Amarillo, I met a younger guy, mid-30s, first-time RVer. His name was Noah. We shared a beer by his fire, and he told me about this strange park he'd stumbled on after a storm in New Mexico. Said the office guy was pale as chalk and told him not to go out after dark. My stomach went cold. "Was it called Sagebrush Hollow?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, how'd you know?" He pulled out his phone to show me photos, but the screen was blank, just a gray square with the words "file unavailable." And in that moment, I understood something terrifying. The story was starting again. A new name, a new voice, a new version of me. I don't tell this to scare you. I tell it because if you ever find yourself driving through the desert and see a hand-painted sign leaning at the side of the road, think twice before turning in. And if you hear that low humming sound beneath the rain, don't stop, don't look, don't remember. I should have stopped after meeting Noah, should have taken the warning my own story had been giving me. But human nature isn't built that way, is it? We don't walk away from the unknown. We walk closer because we can't stand not understanding. And out here on the road, where solitude is both friend and enemy, curiosity becomes survival. I started recording audio logs, not for proof anymore, but for memory. The way people once kept journals during long voyages, except mine weren't about scenery or weather. They were about places that shouldn't exist, about the feeling of being watched from behind your reflection. It's strange how quickly your mind adapts to fear once it becomes routine. The hum became background noise, like tinnitus of the soul. I could tell when I was close to another echo park. The static in my radio would thicken, and headlights behind me would distort, stretching too long like reflections in moving water. Somewhere between Oklahoma and Texas, it all began to blur. I'd drive for hours and the landscape wouldn't change. Same highway billboards, same bent fences, same hitchhiker with the red backpack I'd pass every morning. When I stopped at gas stations, the attendants seemed familiar, not identical, but repeated. A shared rhythm in their speech, the same vacant politeness like they'd rehearsed their lines. And each time I parked, the site number was 6. Always 6. It was late one evening when I realized I wasn't sure how many days I'd been driving. The sunsets looked identical. My GPS flickered, looping the same coordinates again and again. The hum had become a constant presence now, vibrating faintly beneath my seat, like the earth itself was breathing. That night, when I finally pulled over, I didn't even check the park name. I just killed the engine, too tired to care. The air was damp and heavy with that same metallic scent. My headlights shone on a crooked lamppost. For a long moment, I sat still, gripping the wheel. Then I heard it. The voice, soft coming from the back of the RV, a whisper I knew before I even heard the words. "Eli, you made it back." My throat went dry. I turned slowly toward the rear window, but the reflection there wasn't mine. It was him, the version of me I'd seen in the photo, the one standing at the Airstream door. His expression was calm, almost kind, but his eyes were filled with something ancient, like he'd been waiting for me to finally understand. I stood up, every nerve burning, and moved closer. The reflection didn't mimic my movement anymore. It watched me, studied me. "What are you?" I whispered. The reflection smiled faintly. "You already know." Then the lights flickered, and for the briefest instant, I saw through the reflection, past the glass into a world that looked like mine but wasn't. Rows of identical RVs, endless twilight, and dozens of people standing still between them, each staring toward their own reflection, like mannequins waiting for the next part of the story to begin. Then everything went black. I woke up to daylight streaming through the windows. My heart was pounding, my mouth dry. The reflection was gone. The lamppost outside was straight again, and the hum had vanished. I told myself it was a dream, that exhaustion had finally caught up with me. I packed up and drove until I found cell service. The first thing I did was open Google Maps. My location pin sat right where it always had, northern New Mexico, near a faintly marked spot labeled Sagebrush Hollow, except this time there was something new beneath it. Permanent closure, no public access. I clicked it. The photos showed nothing but dust and empty lots. Yet the first review, posted only hours earlier, read, open quote, "Strange park. Seemed quiet. Manager was kind of pale. Stayed in Site 6. Left early because of the humming. Noah." Close quote. That was a week ago. Since then, I've kept moving. Not out of fear anymore, out of respect, because whatever exists out there, it isn't trying to haunt us. It's trying to remember itself. Every traveler who stays becomes another echo, another version added to its memory. Maybe we're helping it stay alive by retelling the stories. Maybe that's why the legends never die. When you think about it, that's how folklore works. The moment you repeat it, you become part of it. But here's the part most people don't understand, and it's why I'm recording this message now. It doesn't matter if Sagebrush Hollow or Silver Pines ever physically existed. The real danger isn't stepping into the wrong RV park. It's when you start to recognize one you've never been to, when you feel that pull of familiarity before your mind can justify it. That's how it begins. The hum, the reflection, the repetition. If you're hearing this and you felt that same vibration under your tires, that strange deja vu when you pull into a park that feels off, listen carefully. Do not stay overnight. Do not speak to the manager if his skin looks too pale. And if the air smells like rain before it's even cloudy, drive. Because once the hum recognizes your engine, you're already part of its loop. Maybe that's what happened to me. Maybe I'm still there, talking to you from a place that doesn't exist anymore. Maybe this voiceover is just another echo replaying through a signal too old to trace. But if even one traveler hears this before turning in off the highway, before curiosity takes the wheel, then maybe the story serves its purpose. Because out here, between the towns and the trails, between fact and folklore, there are still places that remember us too well. And they're patient. They'll wait for the next storm, The next traveler who says just one night, they'll wait until you plug in, settle down, and start to relax. And when you finally hear that low, steady hum rising through the ground, you'll think of me. You'll remember this story. And by remembering it, you'll bring it back. So if you're on the road tonight and the rain starts to fall, do me a favor. Turn off your lights, roll down your window, listen closely. If the sound beneath the rain isn't thunder, keep driving. No matter how tired you are, no matter how safe it looks, don't stop, don't look. And whatever you do, don't remember my name. The first time I saw Blue Lake, I thought it looked like a photograph someone had accidentally made real. The water was too still, the reflection too sharp, like it hadn't learned how to move yet. Pines lined the ridges in perfect symmetry, and in the afternoon light, the whole basin shimmered with this unreal calm that made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be there. I remember stepping out of the RV and just standing there for a while, breathing it in. There was something heavy in the air, not unpleasant, just thick, like the world was holding its breath. My name's Ryan Cole, 34, from Spokane, Washington. I'm a field technician for a water management company. Nothing glamorous, mostly checking sensors, clearing brush, making sure runoff doesn't clog the measuring stations. That week, I'd been assigned to inspect a chain of small lakes up near Colville National Forest. Blue Lake was the last on the list, remote, barely marked, and according to my supervisor, a good spot to camp overnight if you're not picky. I wasn't picky. I just wanted quiet. The road in was all gravel and washboard. Every few minutes, my side mirror would shudder so hard I thought it might come off. My RV wasn't big, an older Class C with faded paint and a permanent smell of pine-scented cleaner, but it handled the bumps like it was dragging a ghost behind it. When I finally reached the lake shore, I found two other campsites, both empty. One had a collapsed picnic table, the other a scorched fire ring full of beer cans. The silence after the engine died was so complete, it actually made my ears ring. I set up near the edge of the lake, maybe 20 feet from the water. The soil there was soft, darker than I expected, almost black, and it smelled rich, like wet bark. Every step left a shallow print. When I jumped down from the RV, I heard a faint sucking sound, the ground pulling at the soles of my boots. It felt alive in a strange way, like the earth was breathing. The afternoon passed quietly. I ran diagnostics on the flow sensor downstream, cleaned some debris out of the intake pipe, and filed a few notes. Around dusk, I made coffee on the small propane stove and watched the mist rise off the water. That was when I noticed the ripples. They weren't from fish. I knew that immediately. These moved differently, too slow and wide, like something displacing the water from below. At first, it looked like small circles drifting outward, but then the surface trembled, spreading in overlapping patterns that made the reflection of the trees blur and reform, blur and reform. It was hypnotic. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, but there wasn't any. Not even the tips of the pines moved. I spent that night reading in the RV with the windows cracked. Around 11, the smell of wet soil crept in stronger than before. Heavy, metallic. I figured it was just the lake, but then I heard it. A faint pop, then a low, wet glurp like someone stepping into deep mud. It came from outside near the water. I turned off the lantern and listened. The sound repeated, slow and rhythmic, moving along the shoreline. When I finally worked up the nerve to look out the window, I saw nothing but fog. My flashlight beam disappeared into it like it was being swallowed. The only thing visible was the edge of the shore, and even that seemed to have changed shape. It sloped downward as if the lake had eaten a few inches of ground since sunset. I told myself I was imagining it. I woke at 2:47 a.m. to the RV rocking. Not hard, just enough to make the cabinets rattle. My first thought was wind, but then I realized the air outside was dead still. I felt it again, a slow, subtle shifting as if the ground itself was settling. My stomach tightened. I threw on a jacket and stepped outside. The fog had thickened to a pale wall. I could see maybe 10 feet in any direction. The ground squelched under my boots, wetter than before. My flashlight caught something strange near the edge of the water, a dark line that hadn't been there earlier. I knelt and ran my hand over it. The soil crumbled away easily, revealing a vertical cut, fresh earth like a sheared wall of dirt. It wasn't erosion. It was collapse. A whole section of shore had broken off and sunk into the lake. I should have packed up right then. Every instinct said this wasn't safe ground. But the idea of driving that twisting gravel road in fog made my pulse jump faster than the thought of waiting till morning. I convinced myself it was fine, that I'd park a few feet farther back at sunrise and call it good. The human brain's real talent, I've learned, is explaining away fear. By morning, the fog had lifted, but what it revealed made my chest go cold. The section that had collapsed was huge, maybe 20 feet long, 3 feet deep, just gone. The water had swallowed it, leaving a crescent-shaped scar along the edge. The soft soil was streaked with pale clay that looked like veins under torn skin. I walked the length of it, recording video for my report, and noticed something else. Thin cracks spiderwebbed farther inland, branching under my campsite, pointing straight toward the RV. I moved the vehicle uphill about 15 yards onto firmer gravel and tried not to think about it. I told myself it was natural subsidence, the kind of thing that happens when water tables shift or a beaver burrow collapses. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that smooth, sheared edge under the water. Later that afternoon, while checking the outflow sensor, I met a man on the trail. He came out of the trees so quietly I didn't hear him until he spoke. "You camped down by the lake?" he asked. He looked about 60, wiry, tan, carrying a canvas pack that looked older than I was. I told him, yeah, just for a few days, part of my job. He nodded slowly. "You shouldn't stay too close," he said. "Ground down there's not right." I asked if he meant erosion, maybe an old sinkhole. He just shrugged. "Used to be deeper, that lake. A lot deeper. It's been swallowing itself for years." Before I could ask what he meant, he tipped his hat and kept walking, following the ridge trail east. I watched him until he disappeared into the trees. Something about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, like someone walking on memory instead of ground, unsettled me more than his words. That night, the fog returned earlier, heavier. I parked with the headlights aimed toward the lake, just to see the edge in case anything shifted. Around midnight, the same popping sound started again, only louder this time, sharper, like air escaping pockets underground. Then came the rumbling, faint at first, like distant thunder, but it kept building until the RV trembled. I ran outside. The flashlight beam caught the water churning near the collapse site, circles of motion, widening fast. Then a deep, wet crack tore through the air, and the ground beneath my feet sank 2 inches. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, as a new fissure split open where my camp chair had been. The soil slumped, rippling toward the water like it was alive. And then, silence. The air stilled, and the lake went flat again, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a long time, too scared to move, listening to the faint hiss of mud settling. The headlights shone across the surface, revealing only drifting debris and the reflection of the stars. But under that, I could have sworn I saw something. Not movement, exactly, but shape, like a darker shadow beneath the reflection, watching from below. I told myself it was just silt, stirred up from the collapse. I told myself a lot of things that night. But around 3 a.m., the sound returned. Closer this time, right beneath the RV, a slow, deliberate gulp, followed by the faintest vibration under the tires. And when I looked out the window again, the shoreline had moved. The line where the earth met the water had crept closer by at least 3 feet. I could see it in the beam of the RV's headlights. Muddy, uneven, wet soil that hadn't been there hours before. The lake was swallowing the shore, 1 inch at a time, like a tide that didn't care about gravity or reason. My first thought was to get out, to start the engine and drive. But the keys weren't where I'd left them. I had dropped them on the counter after dinner. I was sure of it, but they weren't there now. I tore through the cabin, checking under the seat cushions, the bed, the small drawer by the stove. Nothing. The air inside the RV grew heavy, damp. I could smell the lake even through the closed windows. That mineral scent again, like rusted metal and algae, sweet and sickening. I pressed my hand against the floor. It was trembling. Faint, rhythmic pulses like the heartbeat of something enormous beneath the soil. My chest tightened. I grabbed my boots and jacket, flashlight, and stepped out into the night barefoot, still clutching one boot in my hand. The mist had returned, thick, glowing faintly in the headlights. I walked toward the shore and stopped dead. The footprints I'd left earlier, the ones leading from the RV to the lake, were half gone. Not washed away, pulled under. The soil had liquefied just enough that the prints sank deeper with every passing hour. The ground looked wrong, textured like it was breathing. That's when I heard a faint creak from inside the RV. I spun around, heart pounding. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was slow, deliberate, like someone leaning their weight against the doorframe from the inside. I froze, light trained on the window, but saw only my own reflection staring back. Then came another noise, a muffled splash near the waterline. I turned, sweeping the flashlight toward it. The beam caught the surface just as a pocket of bubbles broke through, one after another, then stopped. The ripples spread outward, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw a shape rise beneath them. A dark, round silhouette, maybe a few feet across, rising and sinking in one smooth motion. It was gone before I could focus, but the ground beneath me gave a subtle shudder, followed by a faint hissing sound, like air escaping through mud. I stumbled backward. My heel sank into the soil deeper than it should have. I pulled and it resisted, sticky and cold. It took 2 tries to wrench my boot free. When I looked down, the ground where I'd stood was slowly collapsing inward, leaving a soft, wet hole. That was it. I ran back to the RV, leapt inside, slammed the door, and turned the key. It wasn't in the ignition, but I found it moments later, on the floor beneath the driver's seat. I didn't even remember dropping it. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to fit the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. I shifted into drive and hit the gas, the tires spitting gravel, the whole frame jolting. The headlights swung wildly as the RV lurched uphill, the beam catching glimpses of water where the shore used to be. I drove until the trembling under the wheels faded, until the reflection of the lake was gone behind the trees. I didn't stop until I reached the small turnout where the forest road met the main gravel route. I parked there, engine idling, breath coming in ragged bursts. The night was utterly silent again. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just the echo of my pulse. I waited for dawn before stepping outside. The morning light brought that dull, hazy calm that makes you wonder if you dreamed the whole thing. But when I hiked back toward the lake to collect the rest of my equipment, my stomach dropped. The campsite was gone. Not disturbed. Gone. The ground where the RV had been parked now sloped directly into the lake, a shallow shelf of mud and clay stretching out into still water. My tire tracks ended halfway down that slope, fading into brown water that glistened like oil. The picnic table, the fire ring, even the line of trees that had framed the edge of camp, everything was simply missing. I stood there for a long time, trying to piece together what I was seeing. The shoreline had moved inland at least 20 yards overnight. The soil was fractured and sunken, like the entire basin had slumped toward the center. And the smell, stronger than before, thick and chemical, like rotting metal and algae. I tried to radio the nearest ranger station, but the handheld couldn't get a signal. It was as if the air itself was heavier near the lake, muffling sound. My voice seemed to die in it. That's when I noticed something glinting in the mud a few feet from the water's edge. I walked closer, kneeling carefully to avoid sinking. It was a piece of metal, corroded and twisted, half buried. I pulled it free and wiped it with my sleeve. It was a license plate. Faded blue letters, nearly unreadable. Washington State tag, but old. The kind that hadn't been issued in decades. The ground beneath me pulsed again, faint but unmistakable. I felt it through my knees, through my hands pressed against the soil. A deep, rhythmic vibration that felt too regular to be geological. When I looked at the water, it was no longer still. Concentric ripples radiated from the center of the lake, slow but steady, each wave hitting the shore with a faint, sucking sound. The reflection of the trees wavered and broke apart. I backed away, my boots slipping in the mud. The moment I stepped onto firmer ground, there was a deep, hollow thud, like something striking the underside of the earth. It wasn't loud, but it was low enough to feel in my chest. That's when I saw movement. At first, it looked like a log drifting just below the surface, but it wasn't floating. It was emerging. A mass of dark silt rose slowly, pushing the water aside in thick waves. It was long, sinuous, and featureless, like a root being pulled from the ground. The lake groaned with emotion, a deep, wet sound that made my teeth ache. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, the sound of shifting mud behind me echoing like footsteps. Slow, deliberate, impossibly heavy. By the time I reached the ridge trail, my legs were shaking so badly I had to grab a tree to keep from falling. The air was thinner there, clearer. When I looked back, Blue Lake was still again. Perfectly still. The surface mirrored the sky, calm and unbroken. But the forest was silent. Even the birds had gone. I stayed there until late afternoon before forcing myself back to the RV. I didn't dare go near the shore again. I drove the forest road in second gear, gripping the wheel until my knuckles went white. When I reached the ranger station near Cedar Creek, I told them what I'd seen. The man behind the desk just nodded slowly, said landslides happen all the time, and wrote down my report without looking up. When I mentioned the ripples, the sound, the ground shaking, he finally glanced at me. "You were at Blue Lake?" he asked. I nodded. He sighed, closing the folder. "They closed that area 5 years ago. There's no public camping there anymore." I frowned, pulling my phone from my pocket. I had the GPS coordinates saved, the time-stamped video of the shoreline collapse. I handed it to him. He looked, then turned the screen toward me. The footage was blank, static gray, audio gone, like it had never recorded anything at all. I drove home that evening, but I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that faint pulsing sound under my floorboards, that heartbeat in the ground. When I finally went back a week later, just to prove to myself it was real, the road to Blue Lake was gone. Overgrown, unmarked. No trail, no signs, no map listing the name, just forest. And sometimes when I stop along the old routes for work, I swear I can smell that same metallic sweetness in the soil, thick, heavy, familiar, as if somewhere beneath me, the ground is still breathing, still waiting, still hungry. I don't talk about Blue Lake often. Most people wouldn't believe it anyway. They'd call it stress, exhaustion, or some half-formed hallucination from spending too long in the woods. And maybe that's easier to believe. Maybe it's safer. But the truth is, that night changed how I see every inch of ground beneath me. It's strange how you can walk through the world for 34 years, thinking of Earth as solid, as home, and then in one night, learn that it's just a thin skin floating over something that moves and breathes on its own schedule. A few months after it happened, I was transferred to a new region, the Kettle River Range, north of Republic. It's quieter there, less remote than Colville, but I couldn't shake the habit of watching the ground. Every trail, every lakeside, I'd glance at the soil for cracks, at the water for ripples that didn't belong. Most of the time, everything was perfectly normal. But sometimes, when it rained for too long or the temperature dropped fast after sunset, I'd feel that same heaviness in the air, that pressure like the world was inhaling again. I told myself to move on. I even started camping again, short trips with coworkers, just to prove I could. But the first night back out, parked near a reservoir west of Tonasket, I woke to a familiar sound. Soft, rhythmic pops coming from under the RV. My chest went cold. I threw open the door, light trembling in my hand. Nothing there. The ground was firm, the air dry, the stars clear. I laughed it off in front of the others the next morning, but inside I knew that sound had been real. In the next week, I did some digging. Not literally, not after Blue Lake, but online. I searched geological reports, old ranger notes, anything with the words Blue Lake and collapse. Nothing. The only mention I found was in a scanned newspaper archive from 1984. A small blurb about localized subsidence near the abandoned campground of Blue Lake. No deaths, no follow-up, just a note about unstable terrain caused by pocketed hydrology. The article ended with the line, "Site closed indefinitely pending further geological evaluation." But there were no geological evaluations on record, no satellite images, no references in modern databases. It was as if the place had been erased between map updates, left to dissolve in silence. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about that old man I'd met on the trail, the one who'd warned me the ground wasn't right. I wondered how long he'd known, if he'd seen the lake before it started sinking, if he'd watched other campsites vanish the same way. There had been something in his voice, that half-sorrowful tone of someone who'd already lost something there. One evening, while reviewing field data at home, I noticed something strange in the files from that week. One sensor log, buried under corrupt data. It was from the outflow gauge below the lake, time-stamped the night I left. Only one line of usable output remained. A pressure reading that spiked for 12 seconds, then flatlined completely. No gradual decline, no taper, just a sharp drop into nothing. That was impossible. Even a landslide or full breach would show a decay curve. A total null meant disconnection or destruction. I stared at the number until the screen dimmed itself to sleep. For a moment, I thought I heard it again, the faint hum beneath the floor, deep and slow. I shut my laptop and walked outside, barefoot, just to prove the world was still solid under me. The earth was cool, the night quiet. But even then, standing in the stillness, I caught that smell again, faint, metallic, sweet. You start to realize how much of our peace depends on believing the ground won't betray us, that it won't open its mouth when we sleep. 2 weeks later, I was called to assist on a separate assignment, a survey of wetland stability near the Pendorale River. It wasn't far from where Blue Lake would have been, though no one used that name anymore. The drive was long, winding through stands of cedar and pine that looked so familiar I could almost feel the fog creeping back into my lungs. I arrived just before dusk, parked near the tree line, and checked the equipment. The soil was damp but firm. The air hung heavy, but I told myself it was just humidity. I had to hike half a mile to place a gauge near a small pond surrounded by cattails and moss. It wasn't Blue Lake, but the water's stillness made my throat tighten. As I drove the first stake into the mud, the vibration echoed differently. Not the clean ring of metal in soil, but a dull, swallowed sound, like the ground refused it. I paused, breath caught. There it was again, that faint, rhythmic pulse underfoot. My body went cold. I crouched low, pressing my palm to the soil. A shiver ran through it, slow, deliberate, alive. Something moved in the pond. Not a fish, too large, too slow. The surface lifted just slightly, then settled again. Ripples spread outward and brushed the reeds. I stood up, backing away. My boots sank an inch, then another. The ground was softening. I ran. Branches tore at my jacket as I scrambled back toward the RV, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own breathing. When I reached the clearing, the air felt thinner, like it had been sucked out. I threw my gear inside, started the engine, and didn't look back. As I hit the forest road, the rearview mirror caught the pond, or what was left of it. The waterline dropped suddenly, like someone had pulled a plug from beneath. Mud-frothed reeds bent inward, and then the reflection vanished into a dark, gaping pit. I didn't sleep that night. I just drove until the forest thinned, until I saw the distant orange glow of a town and the solid comfort of streetlights. That was 3 months ago. Sometimes when I'm parked at home and the night gets quiet enough, I still feel it. The slow, impossible rhythm of the earth breathing beneath me. I try to tell myself it's nothing, a trick of memory, a body remembering what fear feels like. But every so often, a small tremor ripples through my floorboards, and I feel that same hollow vibration crawl up through my spine. The strange thing is, it doesn't scare me the way it used to. It's familiar now, like something that's found me again. And in the silence that follows, when the world holds its breath just a little too long, I sometimes think I hear the faintest sound, not from beneath, but from far away, calling through the soil. A soft, wet pulse, the heartbeat of the earth. The breath of Blue Lake, still rising, still sinking, and still hungry. I left that region not long after. Told my supervisor I needed a break, some time off the road, maybe a desk job for a while. He didn't argue. I guess something in my voice made it clear that I wasn't asking. I rented a small cabin outside of Wenatchee, quiet, on higher ground, surrounded by sagebrush instead of pines. I told myself I'd stay there just a few weeks, long enough to stop dreaming about the sound of shifting soil and that slow, wet breath under the floorboards. But even there, in the dry air, I'd wake sometimes to silence so deep it felt unnatural, and I'd find myself listening, not for coyotes, not for wind, but for that low, hidden pulse. People talk about fear like it's a moment, something that spikes and fades. It isn't. It's sediment. It settles in layers, one over another, until even the solid parts of you start to sink. I didn't realize how much Blue Lake had changed me until I started avoiding mirrors, because every time I looked, I saw the same expression I wore that night, wide-eyed, holding still, waiting for the ground to move. I tried to reason with it. I told myself the lake was just unstable terrain, that the collapses had a geological cause, that I hadn't seen something alive, only a phenomenon my mind had turned into a shape. But logic doesn't reach that deep. There are things the brain knows that the body won't accept, and things the body remembers that the brain tries to erase. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see the surface of that water. Perfectly still. Perfectly wrong. I started journaling. Writing helps me make sense of things, or at least it used to. I wrote down every detail I could remember. The way the fog carried no scent until it was too close to breathe, the faint electric taste of the air, the pulse beneath the ground that synced almost perfectly with my own heartbeat. I wrote until my hands cramped, until the words blurred together, and still it didn't feel like enough, like I was missing the most important part. Then one morning, while reviewing the notes, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Every time I'd written the word ground, I'd press the pen harder. The ink had bled deeper into the paper, sometimes tearing it. It was as if my hand was trying to tell me what I refused to say aloud, that the ground was no longer safe, not anywhere. I thought about that old man again, the one on the trail. I started to wonder if he'd meant more than unstable soil. The ground down there's not right, he'd said. Maybe he wasn't warning me about geology. Maybe he meant something older. A week ago, I had another dream. I was back at the lake, though it wasn't night this time. The water was clear, glassy, and I could see straight to the bottom, except there was no bottom, just layers of sediment fading into a darker, shifting mass. The sun flickered on the surface like the pulse of a heartbeat, and beneath it, shapes moved, slow, deliberate, ancient. I could hear them breathing. I felt the vibration in my chest. I tried to move, but my feet were stuck, buried ankle-deep in wet soil that tightened every time I struggled. The water began to rise, soundless, and I realized it wasn't coming from the lake at all. It was coming from underneath me, pushing upward, as if the earth itself was exhaling. I woke up gasping. My floorboards were trembling. It lasted less than a second, maybe just a passing truck on the highway, but my gut knew better. It was that same rhythm. Slow, measured, waiting. That's when I decided to record this story. Not to warn anyone, I doubt most would believe it, but to make sense of what's left of it inside me. Because somewhere out there, Blue Lake still exists, whether it's on any map or not. I know it's still there, buried beneath its own reflection, sinking one breath at a time. And if you ever find yourself driving the back roads north of Colville and the pines begin to thin and the ground feels too soft beneath your tires, Stop. Don't go farther, even if the road looks fine, even if the air smells clean, because it's there, just under the surface, waiting. They say the earth is ancient, that it remembers everything buried in it. I think sometimes it remembers us too well. It waits for us to forget, to trust the soil again, to set our tents, park our rigs, light our fires, and then when we finally start to feel safe, it exhales. I don't know if what's beneath Blue Lake is alive in any way we'd recognize. Maybe it's not a creature at all. Maybe it's just the planet's own hunger, the way it reclaims what it lent us for too long. But I've come to believe something simple, something terrible. The earth doesn't just hold us. It chooses when to let go. When I leave the cabin now, I watch the ground the way sailors watch the sea. I look for cracks, for ripples, for that subtle shift in color that means the world is breathing again. Some nights I hear it through the open window, a slow, damp rhythm in the soil beneath the sagebrush, patient and endless. And I find myself listening to it longer than I should, because fear fades, but recognition doesn't. And part of me, some quiet, restless part, can't help wondering if the ground I stand on now is the same ground I left behind at Blue Lake. Maybe it all connects underground, one endless lung filling and emptying, one heartbeat stretching through miles of soil. Maybe we're all camping on its back, pretending the ground is still. Or maybe, one day soon, I'll feel that familiar tremor again, the small, patient pulse under my feet, and I'll finally understand what the man on that trail was trying to tell me, that the ground isn't just ground, it's alive, and it remembers. I remember the first time I saw the town sign. Faded letters, half swallowed by desert dust, leaning at an angle as though the wind had been whispering secrets to it for decades. Silverton. Pop 0. That's when I should have turned around. But curiosity, it's a dangerous kind of gravity. My name's Eli Warren, I'm 42, born and raised in southern Utah. I've been living in my RV full-time for the last 3 years, traveling the backroads, chasing ghost stories, photographing forgotten places for a travel blog I started during lockdown. What started as a hobby became a way of life. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being just a visitor to these places. I started listening to them. That's what brought me to Silverton. Not the one with tourists and breweries, but the other one, the real one. The one lost in the high desert, 20 miles off Highway 191, unmarked on most maps. I'd heard rumors about it through a local in Moab, an old prospector who told me over a cup of bitter coffee that some towns weren't meant to die, they just went quiet. He said Silverton was one of those. I left early that morning, my RV humming like a tired beast as the sun rose over the buttes. The road turned from asphalt to gravel, then to something less. A trail of forgotten intentions that wound through sagebrush and silence. There were no signs of life, not even birds, just the hiss of wind through the cracked windows and the steady, uncertain pulse of my engine. The first thing I noticed when I rolled into town was the stillness. Not the kind you find in deep wilderness, but a hollow kind, like everything was holding its breath. The buildings leaned inward, wooden ribs exposed, paint long eaten by sand. An old church steeple jutted above the rooftops, its bell missing, but the chain still swinging slightly, as if someone had just tugged it. I parked near the old general store and stepped out, camera in hand. The air smelled of dry timber and rust, with something faint underneath, a mineral tang, like rain that never arrived. Every footstep echoed louder than it should have. I called out once just to hear my own voice bounce back. It didn't. The sound just fell. I should have taken that as a sign. I started walking, snapping photos of doorways and windows. Many had curtains still hanging, tattered but present. Inside one building, I saw plates on a table, dust-coated but untouched. Like whoever lived there had stepped out for a moment and never came back. In another, a child's doll sat propped against the wall, its porcelain face cracked, eyes staring at me like it had been waiting. When I reached the church, I hesitated. There was something about it, a faint sound, maybe wind whistling through the rafters, but it wasn't quite wind. It had rhythm, almost a whisper. I stepped closer. The wooden door was swollen from time, but still closed. I pressed my ear against it, and I swear, beneath the hum of silence, I heard a voice, not a word, not a phrase, just the texture of sound. A breath, drawn too close. I pulled back fast. My rational mind told me it was the wind shifting through gaps, maybe a pressure difference inside the building. I'd read about that sort of thing. Ghost towns have their own acoustics. Old boards breathe differently. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something behind that door was aware of me. I backed away, forcing a laugh under my breath. "Just sound, Eli," I muttered. "Nothing more." But when I turned toward my RV, I froze. The passenger door, the one I'd locked, was open. My chest tightened. I scanned the surroundings, but there was nothing. No tracks in the sand, no sign of movement. I walked slowly, every nerve alive. Inside, everything looked the same. Bed unmade, coffee mug still on the counter, camera bag on the seat. Nothing missing, but the air inside felt warmer, like someone had been sitting there, breathing. I shut the door, locked it again, and stood in silence, heart pounding. That's when I noticed something new, faint footprints in the dust by the driver's side. Bare feet. Small. Child-sized. I followed them with the kind of hesitation you can feel in your teeth. They led from my RV toward the church. But halfway there, they stopped. Just ended. As if the child had sunk into the ground or been lifted straight into the air. By then the sun was dropping fast, spilling red light through the broken windows. The town glowed in a sick kind of beauty. I told myself I'd leave in the morning. I wanted to get some sunset shots before dark. That's what I told myself, anyway. I grabbed my camera and tripod and walked toward the old main street. I started filming, slow pans, close-ups, wide angles, all the stuff I'd done 100 times before. But as I reviewed the footage on my camera screen, I noticed something wrong. In one frame, a shape moved past a window. Small, pale, almost translucent. I played it back 3 times, zoomed in. The shape wasn't there on the first playback, then appeared on the second. On the third, gone again. I swallowed hard, sweat prickling down my back. The rational part of me, the same part that always tried to keep fear neat and explainable, said it was compression artifact, light distortion. But the silence pressing in said otherwise. By dusk, the desert temperature dropped 20 degrees. I retreated to the RV, locked every door and window, and sat in the driver's seat staring out at the empty street. The moon rose, a silver coin over the horizon, and everything outside looked bleached and unreal. At around midnight, I heard it. A knock. 3 soft taps against the RV's rear door. I froze, every muscle wired tight. I listened. Another knock, slow, deliberate, exactly the same rhythm. I reached for the flashlight, hands trembling, and called out, "Who's there?" No answer. The knock came again, but softer this time, like whoever it was didn't want to wake something else. I took a deep breath, opened the drawer, and grabbed the crowbar I kept for emergencies. My legs felt numb as I stepped toward the door. The air smelled faintly metallic, like the inside of old coins. When I swung the door open, there was nothing, just the dry wind. But the footprints were back, small, barefoot, trailing away from the RV toward the church. That's when I realized I hadn't imagined the voice, and the town wasn't empty. The desert holds sound differently at night. It doesn't echo the way forests do. It swallows it. A whisper disappears in a heartbeat, and a scream never finds its way back to you. I stood there, my flashlight trembling in my hand, tracing the faint line of those small barefoot prints leading toward the church. Every rational thought told me to get back in the RV, lock the doors, and drive, just drive. But there's this thing about fear. It doesn't always push you to run. Sometimes it lures you closer, promising answers you're not ready for. The prints were perfectly spaced, too neat to be made by chance. They curved slightly, like a child had been skipping. But there hadn't been children here for a century. The church door creaked as I pushed it open, the old hinges complaining in long metallic sighs. Inside, moonlight leaked through cracks in the roof, illuminating dust motes that hung like ghosts midair. Pews sat crooked, half collapsed, and an old Bible lay open on the altar. Something about that book being open felt wrong. Not just strange, intentional. I took a step forward, the wooden floor groaning under me. The smell hit me first, old rot mixed with something damp, like river clay. My flashlight beam wavered across the floorboards until it found the source, a small doll, the same one I'd seen in the other building. It was sitting upright on the front pew, facing me now. My throat went dry. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. I tried to convince myself it wasn't the same one. Maybe there were two, mass-produced back in the day, same face, same dress. But when I looked closer, I saw it. The same crack across its cheek, the same missing eye. I remembered exactly how it had been leaning before, tilted to the left. Now it sat perfectly straight. I swallowed, stepping backward, and that's when the whisper came again, clearer this time, near my ear. "Don't leave us here." I spun around so fast my flashlight slammed into the wall, shattering the beam into fragments. My breath came ragged, clouding in the cold air, even though the desert night shouldn't have been that cold. When I looked back, the doll had fallen on its side, as if pushed. Something in me cracked then. I backed out of the church, my mind nearly tripping over the steps, and stumbled into the dirt street. The town felt alive now, the shadows between buildings deeper, the silence heavier. The air was vibrating like a low hum beneath the world. I ran back to my RV and slammed the door shut. My fingers shook as I twisted the ignition key. The engine coughed once, twice, then died. I tried again. Nothing. Just the faint click of a starter that wasn't catching. "Come on," I whispered. "Come on, not now." The third time, the engine finally roared awake. Relief flooded me so hard I nearly laughed. I threw it into gear and floored the accelerator, kicking up dust as I sped down the dirt road. But the headlights caught something in the mirror, a reflection, small, pale, standing in the middle of the road behind me, watching. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. For miles, the desert seemed to shift around me. The road twisted in ways it hadn't before. My GPS, mounted on the dash, flickered, the map dissolving into static. I turned it off. I didn't want to see it anymore. I drove until the sun broke the horizon, a thin orange line cutting the world back into something familiar. When I finally found a rest stop near Bluff, Utah, I parked under a dying cottonwood tree and just sat there, shaking. The next day, I checked my footage. Every clip from Silverton was gone. Not corrupted. Gone. The folder still existed, but empty. My camera logs showed the files had been deleted at exactly 3:12 a.m. That was the same time the knocking had started. I didn't tell anyone about it for weeks. It wasn't the kind of story you could explain without sounding unhinged. But something about that town stayed in my head. The footprints, the doll, the voice. It was like I'd left something behind there and it wanted me back. A month later, I met a man in Farmington, another traveler, ex-cop turned RV nomad. We got to talking about deserted places and the things people leave behind. When I mentioned Silverton, his eyes changed. He said, "You went there? That place was condemned after the mining collapse in '62. They say the ground's unstable, a lot of sinkholes, caves underneath. Anyone live there?" I asked. He hesitated. They found a few bodies back in the '80s. A family that tried to squat in one of the houses said they were looking for gold left behind. But the weird thing is, they found 2 sets of footprints leaving the camp. Only one set matched the bodies. I didn't sleep that night. That conversation gnawed at me, looping back every time I closed my eyes. If what he said was true, then whoever or whatever was in that town wasn't new. It had been there long before me, waiting. 2 weeks later, I did something I swore I wouldn't do. I went back. I told myself it was for closure, that I just wanted to face whatever was haunting me, take one last photo, and finally move on. But deep down, I knew better. There's a strange magnetism to places that scare you. They promise a piece of truth the rest of the world hides. When I reached the turnoff, the road looked different. The sign was gone. Not vandalized or fallen, just gone. The wooden post still stood, smooth where the lettering should have been. The air was heavier this time. The silence had a weight that made my ears ring. I parked in the same spot as before and stepped out slowly. Everything looked rearranged. The buildings were in slightly different positions. The church closer, the general store smaller, like the town had shifted in its sleep. And then I saw it. My own footprints, faint but visible, leading into town, the same ones I'd made a month ago. Except now, there were two sets, one leading in, one leading out. The second set was smaller, barefoot. My hands went cold. I wanted to run back to the RV to pretend I hadn't seen it, but something drew me forward again. Curiosity, guilt, maybe both. I followed the tracks, one step after another, until I reached the church door. It was already open. The Bible was still on the altar, but the pages had turned. My flashlight beam caught a verse I didn't remember seeing before. It wasn't highlighted, but the text seemed darker than the rest. Open quote, "And the dust shall remember the shape of every soul that walked upon it." Close quote. I stared at the words until the letters started to blur. Then I felt it again, the warmth at my back, the sensation of breath too close. "Eli," a voice whispered, my name perfectly clear. That's when the flashlight went out. The darkness inside that church didn't feel like an absence of light. It felt alive, thick, close, like something that had been waiting for the moment I'd be foolish enough to stand still. I froze, barely breathing. The air pressed against me, heavier with each heartbeat. My name was still echoing inside my head, softer now, like it was being whispered by someone too close to be real. Eli. That voice didn't come from memory or imagination. It came from right behind me. I spun around, raising the dead flashlight like a weapon. Nothing, just the open doorway, and beyond it, the faint gray shimmer of the desert dawn. I took a shaky step toward the exit, every instinct in me screaming to leave. But then something glimmered near the front pew. Faint, metallic, half buried under dust. I knelt down, brushing it away. It was a small silver locket, the kind a child might wear. Inside, two photos, one of a man and woman smiling in black and white. The other, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, straight hair, blank stare. The edges of her photograph were smeared as if something wet had blurred them. The name engraved on the back made my stomach twist. E. Warren. My breath caught. That was my name. I dropped the locket like it burned. It clattered on the wood, echoing too loudly, like the sound wanted attention. And that's when I saw it, the doll again, sitting on the pew beside where I'd knelt. But it wasn't cracked anymore. Its face looked whole, perfect. Its glass eyes were fixed on me. "Who are you?" I whispered, voice trembling. And from somewhere deep within the church, a voice that didn't sound like a child or an adult, but something in between, answered, "Don't you remember?" I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and bolted out the door. The morning light hit me like a slap, too bright, too sharp. I sprinted to my RV, not daring to look back until I slammed the door behind me. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, and caught. I floored it. The tires spit dust and gravel as the town disappeared in my mirrors. But I couldn't shake it. That name, the locket, the voice. "Don't you remember?" I drove until my vision blurred. Eventually, I pulled over on a ridge overlooking a dry wash. The sun was high now, the sky a brutal blue. I tried to convince myself it was all some elaborate trick, a coincidence, maybe even a hallucination from lack of sleep. But the locket was still on my dashboard. I dropped it. I swore I dropped it, but it was sitting there like it had followed me. I opened it again. This time, the photos were different. The man and woman were gone. Only the little girl remained. And she was smiling now. That night, I parked at a small RV campground near Cortez, the kind of place where the only sound after sundown is the hum of old generators and the clinking of metal in the wind. I didn't tell anyone where I'd been. Didn't even introduce myself to the other travelers. I just sat there, lights off, watching my reflection in the window. Around midnight, I heard movement outside. footsteps crunching lightly over the gravel. I thought maybe it was one of the other campers until I realized it circled my RV 3 times before stopping. Then came the knock. Not like before. Softer. Almost polite. I held my breath. The knock came again, same rhythm. 3 slow taps. I crept toward the window beside the door, just enough to peek through the curtain. The moonlight cast a pale stripe across the gravel lot, and for a second, I didn't see anything. Then movement, something small stepping out from the shadows of the nearby picnic table. A child. A girl, barefoot, wearing a white dress that looked more like dust than fabric. Her hair hung straight across her face, and in her hand, dangling from her fingers, was the silver locket. I stumbled backward, knocking over the mug on the counter. Coffee spilled across the table, spreading like dark water. I reached for the flashlight again, but my hand shook too badly to grip it. The knock came once more, slower this time, the weight of patience behind it. Eli. Her voice was outside, but it felt inside, like the air was speaking. I didn't move. Couldn't. The silence after that last word stretched so long I thought maybe she was gone. Then the door handle turned. Just once. A slow, testing twist. My stomach turned to ice. I lunged forward and braced against it. "Go away!" I shouted. The sound of my own voice felt alien, too loud, too desperate. For a heartbeat, everything went still. Then, faint laughter. A child's giggle fading into nothing. The handle stopped moving. The air went flat again. When I finally worked up the courage to look outside, she was gone. But the next morning, when I opened the RV door, something lay on the steps. The doll. Perfectly intact, no cracks, no dust, just clean porcelain, and carved into its back with something sharp, "Remember us." I didn't travel much after that for a while, stayed near towns, near people. But the thing about ghost towns, about the past, is that they follow you even when you run. Every now and then I'd catch glimpses in the corners of mirrors, a flicker of movement too small to name. Sometimes my phone would ring once at exactly 3:12 a.m., the same time everything happened that night in Silverton. No caller ID, no sound, just breathing. Months passed before I dared look into Silverton's history again. I found an article buried in a local archive, yellowed scan dated 1924. It mentioned a mine collapse that trapped 14 people underground, including a family of 3, Thomas, Clara, and Elise Warren. Elise. My chest went hollow reading that name. It couldn't be coincidence, but how could it be anything else? I tried tracing my own family records. Nothing. No relation, no shared lineage, at least not directly. But the more I dug, the less I slept. Some nights I'd dream of the church, of standing before that altar again, and hearing her voice closer each time. "We remember you." It wasn't until one night camping just outside Gallup that I realized something had changed in me. I'd always loved the sound of emptiness, the wide, open hush of the desert. But now, silence scared me, because silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of breath and whispers and something patient enough to wait for me to stop pretending it wasn't there. And sometimes, when the wind cuts across the desert just right, I swear I can hear children's laughter under the engine's hum. There's a saying among old travelers, the road gives back what you bring to it. If you carry peace, it leads you home. If you carry ghosts, it makes sure you never lose them again. I don't go near ghost towns anymore, but sometimes, when I park alone in the desert, I'll see small barefoot prints in the sand beside my RV come morning. Not leading anywhere, just circling. The locket still sits on my dashboard. I've tried throwing it away twice. It always comes back. And inside, the little girl still smiles, only now she looks older. And sometimes she looks like me. You start to live differently after something like that. You stop trusting silence. You stop trusting mirrors. And you learn that not every road takes you somewhere new. Some just bring you back to what you tried to forget. Months have passed since I last saw Silverton. I tell myself I've moved on, that I've rebuilt a sense of normalcy. But normal doesn't mean safe, not when you've stared at the empty shape of a place that remembers you better than you remember yourself. I'm still traveling, still in the same RV, But I take highways now, not back roads. I stay near towns, near cell service, near headlights and human noise. I tell myself I'm just being cautious, but deep down I know I'm still being followed. It's not that I see her anymore, not clearly. But there are moments in the still reflection of my coffee mug at sunrise where I think I see the faint outline of that girl's face, the hair, the empty eyes, and always that half smile that doesn't look cruel, just knowing. I've learned to ignore her, mostly. But ignoring doesn't mean forgetting. I started documenting again, taking photos, recording my voiceovers, posting my travels. My audience loves the mystery of it all, the haunted deserts, the echoes of forgotten places. They think the stories are metaphors. They don't realize that some of them are true. A few months back, I was driving through Nevada, that long, endless stretch between Ely and Tonopah, where the land looks like it's been flattened by time itself. The sun had already dropped behind the mountains when my GPS flickered again. For a moment, the screen went white, then displayed a single word, Silverton. I froze. The map coordinates were wrong, hundreds of miles off from where Silverton should be. The terrain didn't even match. I tapped the screen, it glitched again, then went black. I turned the device off, left it that way. But an hour later, as I drove through a basin of white sand and shadow, I saw a light ahead, a faint orange glow, pulsing like a lantern in the wind. It shouldn't have been there. Nothing's out there that far. No houses, no camps, just dust. Still, I slowed down. My headlights fell across an old wooden sign buried halfway in the dirt. The letters were nearly gone, worn smooth by decades of wind, but under the layer of sand I could just make them out. Pop. 0. Silverton. I didn't get out. Not this time. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, the RV idling, the desert completely still. And then, the sound. A single knock, not on the door, not from outside, from underneath. It was soft, patient, and it came 3 times. I could feel the vibration under my feet. I didn't move. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight they went numb. Then another knock, closer to the center of the floor. I turned the engine off. The world fell silent. The only thing I could hear was my own breathing. Then a whisper, right beneath me. Let us out. I started the RV again, so fast I nearly snapped the key. The tires spun, kicking up clouds of dust as I tore down that road until my mirrors were filled with nothing but darkness. I didn't stop until dawn broke over the salt flats. When I finally got out to check the undercarriage, there was nothing there. No marks, no dents. Just a thin layer of sand clinging to the frame. But when I ran my hand along it, I felt something etched into the metal. Shallow, but deliberate. 3 words. Remember us, Eli. I don't tell people this part. It's too much. Too strange, even for the kind of stories I tell online. But if you've ever driven through the desert at night, really alone, you know how it feels when the world stops being empty and starts feeling like it's watching. The desert doesn't erase history. It preserves it, buries it maybe, but never lets it die. Every ghost town, every collapsed mine, every sun-bleached sign is still breathing in its own way. Sometimes, when the wind blows right, it exhales through you. Maybe Silverton was never a town in the way we think. Maybe it's a wound, one the earth never bothered to close. I've learned something from all this. Something I didn't understand before. People think ghost towns are empty because no one lives there anymore. But they're not empty. They're full, just not of the living. They hold on to moments, to voices, to names carved in floorboards and inked in old Bibles. They remember the weight of footsteps, the sound of laughter that never echoed back. And if you stay long enough, they start to remember you. There are nights now when I sit outside the RV, campfire burning low, staring into the kind of silence that feels like it's leaning in to listen. And I talk to it, not out loud, not in words, just in thought, a kind of offering, because maybe that's all those places ever wanted, to be acknowledged, to be remembered. Maybe the ghosts aren't haunting us. Maybe we're haunting them by refusing to let their silence rest. Sometimes I think about going back one last time, not to face it, not to challenge it, but to understand. But I know the truth now. Some roads don't lead you home. They just circle you until you forget which direction you were heading in the first place. And maybe that's what happened to the people of Silverton. Maybe they never really left. Maybe they just walked the loop long enough that the world moved on without them. I've seen too much now to pretend it was all in my head. I still have the locket. I still see the footprints. I still wake up at 3:12 a.m. sometimes, certain I can hear that soft laughter. Not cruel, not mocking, just waiting. Maybe someday I'll stop driving. Find a place that feels still enough to rest in. But part of me knows I never will. Because once you've driven through uncharted territory, the kind of places where maps forget you exist, you can't go back to believing you're the only one on the road. The ghosts don't follow you because they're angry. They follow you because you looked at them. Because for one moment, you listened. And once you do that, they remember your name. So if you ever find yourself on a lonely desert road and you see a sign half buried in sand, don't stop. Don't take photos. Don't listen to the wind when it starts to whisper. Because the thing about ghost towns is they're not abandoned. They're just waiting for someone to come back. And maybe this time they'll remember you. The first time I heard that sound, that strange, hollow whistle threading through the pines, I thought it was just the wind. Out here in Central Oregon, the forests breathe differently. They seem to exhale in slow, conscious waves. My name's Eli Marsh. I'm 37, and for the past few years, I've spent every spare weekend camping alone in the Deschutes National Forest. It started as therapy after my divorce. Just me, my old Class C motorhome, and the endless green silence. But that trip last October, the one I'm about to tell you about, changed the way I see this land forever. It was mid-fall, one of those weeks when the forest turns brittle with cold at night and the air carries the first taste of snow. I'd found a little clearing just off Forest Road 9710, not far from Wickiup Reservoir. There was no one else around. At least no one I could see. The campground had closed for the season, but I had a key to the gate from a ranger friend who knew I liked to fish the reservoir after the summer crowds cleared out. I parked the RV between two thick clusters of ponderosa, their trunks leaning slightly inward like watchful sentinels. When I stepped outside, I could smell the dry resin of pine sap and something faintly sweet beneath it, almost like wild sage after rain. That first night was calm. I built a small fire, cooked some trout from the last trip, and sat back under a deep, trembling sky. The wind whispered through the needles, soft and continuous, and the sound wrapped around me like a lullaby. I remember thinking how the forest always had its own voice, its own rhythm of breath. But as the hours passed, that rhythm changed. The air grew sharp, colder, and the fire began to sputter strangely, not from lack of fuel, but as though the oxygen around it were thinning. Then came the sound again, a low whistle moving through the trees. It wasn't the random gust of wind I'd expected. It rose and fell in deliberate tones, almost like someone humming far off in the woods. I told myself it was just the air moving through the pine hollows, nature's flute, nothing more. But it came again at midnight, closer this time, weaving between the trees like it was circling my camp. I turned off my lantern, sat still, and listened. The silence between those notes felt alive. Then, faintly, I heard something else, a whisper, just a few words too faint to make out. I stood by the RV door, scanning the dark. My breath came out in white streams. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking more than I'd like to admit. Nothing. Only the wind sighing through the forest again, soft as breath over glass. The next morning, everything looked perfectly ordinary. Blue sky, frost along the edges of the meadow, a calm mirror of the lake in the distance. But something about the air felt heavy. When I walked down to the reservoir, I found the footprints, not human, not quite animal, bare, elongated impressions in the silt near the waterline, as though someone had walked out of the lake itself. The prints faced inland, toward the trees. I took a few pictures on my phone, though later, when I checked them, They were all blurred. At the time, I brushed it off as a trick of light, maybe water distortion. Still, I felt uneasy enough to move the RV a little closer to the tree line, thinking the trees would make me feel safer. They didn't. That night, the forest began to move. Around 10, I heard something brush against the RV. Not a branch, not an animal. It sounded like the side of a palm dragging slowly across the metal siding. I killed the lights again and sat up in bed, holding my breath. Then came the whistle, closer than before, winding right past my window. The pine shadows outside seemed to twitch in the dim moonlight. That was when I smelled it. The faint sweetness from before, now stronger, mixed with something older, like wet bark and smoke. I pressed my face to the window, but saw nothing but the black line of trees. I tried to convince myself it was the forest's natural breath again, some mix of air pressure and altitude playing tricks on me. Still, my heart wouldn't slow. When I finally did fall asleep, it wasn't rest that took me. It was something closer to collapse. I dreamed of water moving beneath the forest floor, dark and restless, whispering through roots. I woke just before dawn, drenched in sweat, and heard that same low humming from the woods again. Only this time, it wasn't a whistle. It was a voice. It said my name. I didn't move for a full minute. The air inside the RV was so still that every tiny sound, the tick of cooling metal, the slow drip of condensation from the vent, felt amplified. Then it came again, drawn out, fragile, almost mournful. Eli. That was when I noticed the pine needles against the windshield, hundreds of them arranged in strange looping patterns, spiraling inward toward the driver's seat. I stepped outside and saw the trees swaying lightly, though there was no wind. The forest seemed to breathe around me, inhaling, exhaling, like something immense just beneath the surface of the earth. When I told myself I'd leave that morning, I meant it. But something about the air kept me from packing. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear that had turned into fascination. I started walking toward the sound through the underbrush thick with frost and old needles. About 100 yards in, the trees thinned, and I found an old fire ring made of stones, long unused. Around it were scraps of cloth half buried in moss, and in the center a charred piece of carved wood, a small totem shaped like a face with hollow eyes. It looked almost human, except the mouth was wide, open in a silent scream. When I picked it up, the wind stopped completely. Not slowed, stopped. The silence pressed against my eardrums until it hurt. Then, as if the world had just taken a breath, the whisper came again, softer this time, drifting from behind me. Leave it. I froze. Slowly I turned around, but there was no one there, only the pines, tall and still as stone. That was the moment I should have gone back to the RV, started the engine, and driven until I hit Bend or anywhere else with cell service. But I didn't, because just beyond that clearing, through a break in the trees, I saw something that made me stay. There was a figure, faint, translucent, like a shimmer in the cold air, standing between two pines. It looked like a woman, her hair floating slightly as if she were underwater. She didn't move. She only stared at me with an expression that was neither threatening nor kind, just hollow, waiting. The totem slipped from my hand. The wind started again, gently this time, carrying with it a low, rhythmic murmur that rose and fell like breath. And somewhere in that sound, I heard words. Not English, not any language I knew, but they carried meaning all the same. It was the language of the forest itself. A sound too ancient to translate, yet I understood one thing clearly. I was not supposed to be there. Still, I stayed until the figure faded with the light. And that night, the forest changed its tone. The whispering turned into something like a song, long, drawn-out hums, echoing through the trees, weaving in patterns too precise to be random. It sounded like memory, like grief. That was when I began to understand. Whatever lived in those pines wasn't just haunting the forest. It was protecting it. I didn't sleep much that night. The wind carried too many voices. Every time I shut my eyes, I heard that soft calling, not just my name anymore, but words I didn't know. Sometimes it came from far away, sometimes right outside the RV walls. I remember lying there, staring at the faint red glow of the propane heater, thinking about what the forest was trying to tell me. Because that's what it felt like. Not a haunting, not an attack, but communication, an exchange between the living and something older. By sunrise, I'd convinced myself it was just exhaustion, too much solitude, not enough sleep. I made coffee, stepped outside, and tried to shake off the unease. The ground was glazed with frost, glittering beneath the pale light. I walked toward the clearing again, toward where I'd dropped the totem the night before. But when I got there, it was gone. In its place was a ring of smooth, freshly turned soil. Someone, or something, had buried it. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though there was no fire. I crouched and pressed my hand to the ground. It was warm. That's when I heard footsteps, not far behind me, soft, deliberate, pacing across the brittle underbrush. I turned, half expecting to see another camper, maybe a ranger doing off-season patrol, but no one was there. Only the trees, their trunks dark and glistening with dew. I called out again, but my voice didn't carry far. It was like the sound was being swallowed, pulled into the forest's lungs. Then came a low creaking sound, a pine shifting, or so I thought. But the motion wasn't random. One of the trees, tall and thin, seemed to bow slightly toward me. The wind didn't touch the others, only that one. I backed away slowly, the sound of cracking bark following my steps. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, before I realized I wasn't alone. There was someone standing just beyond the tree line. Not the shimmering figure from before. This one was solid, human. A man, older, with a ranger jacket so faded it blended with the woods. His face was gray with stubble, his eyes shadowed beneath a cap pulled low. He didn't move until I spoke. "Hey," I said, raising a hand. "You out here on patrol?" He tilted his head as if the words reached him from underwater. Then he took a slow step forward. "This road's closed," he said. His voice rasped, dry as bark. "Shouldn't be anyone camping past the gate." "I know," I said. "My friend at the district office gave me access. He lifted a hand, stopping me. "Doesn't matter who gave it. You shouldn't stay here. The forest doesn't like to be disturbed." I blinked, unsure what to say. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past me, toward the circle of freshly turned soil. His eyes narrowed. "You touched something that wasn't yours." "The totem?" I asked, my mouth dry. He nodded slowly. "That wasn't made for you. That's part of the wind spirit's resting place." "The wind spirit?" The man's gaze hardened. "There's an old story about this part of Deschutes. The people who lived here before, they said the forest breathes with the spirit of a woman who died protecting it from fire. Her soul stayed in the wind, warning anyone who tried to take too much. Some say she still speaks through the pines. Others say she doesn't like to be remembered at all." The wind stirred just then, moving between us. For a moment, I thought I heard her voice again, faint but distinct, whispering through the needles. "Leave it be." When I looked back at the man, he was gone, just gone. No footsteps, no movement, no sign of where he'd gone. That's when I started to panic. I ran back to the RV, locked the door, and sat in the driver's seat with the keys in my hand. But even with the engine off, I could hear something humming beneath the metal, a vibration like the vehicle itself had begun to breathe. I told myself I'd leave, but when I turned the ignition, the engine sputtered once and died. The battery light blinked. It was as if the forest had decided I wasn't leaving yet. The air outside darkened early that afternoon. The clouds over the Cascades rolled in thick and low, muting the light until the woods turned gray and featureless. I spent the day pacing inside, my nerves stretched tight. When dusk came, I heard movement again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching over the frosted ground. Then came the tapping. It started on the side of the RV, faint knocks, spaced evenly, moving from the front to the back like someone was walking their fingers along the metal. I stood still, listening. The tapping stopped. Then came another sound, soft and rhythmic, like someone whispering through the vents. At first, I couldn't make out the words. Then I realized it wasn't language at all. It was breath. Slow, steady exhalations moving through the ducts, syncing with my own until I couldn't tell if it was coming from outside or within. The wind rose suddenly, howling through the trees. The RV rocked slightly. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. The forest outside looked almost liquid in the swirling mist. Pine needles whipped through the air, glittering in the beam of my light. That's when I saw her again. The woman from before. Only this time, she wasn't distant or shimmering. She stood 10 feet away, hair streaming behind her like smoke, her eyes wide and pale. She lifted her hand, pointing toward the clearing. I didn't want to follow, but something in me moved anyway, like she'd pulled the air out of my lungs and replaced it with her own. The forest grew louder with every step, not the kind of loud that fills your ears, but the kind that presses against your bones. The whispering became a chorus, voices rising and falling around me. I stumbled into the clearing and froze. The ground where the totem had been buried was open again, dug out, the soil scattered. In its place lay something else, a circle of stones, glowing faintly in the dark, pulsing with a deep orange light. It wasn't fire, but something like heat. I could feel it radiating upward, warming my face. The woman stepped closer to the circle, her gaze fixed on me. "You took it," she said, her voice low, almost breaking. "You woke what should sleep." "I didn't mean to," I said, barely able to breathe. "The forest remembers," she whispered, "and so must you." Then she stepped into the light. The air exploded with sound, wind tearing through the pines, branches whipping, the earth itself shuddering beneath my feet. I fell backward, the flashlight spinning from my hand. For a moment, I saw her face clearly, calm, almost sad, before she vanished in the blaze of orange that shot up through the trees. When I came to, it was dawn. The forest was still again. The air smelled like rain and ash. The circle was gone. So was she. I stumbled back to the RV, numb and shaking. The engine started on the first turn. As I drove away, the wind followed me down the road, whispering through the trees. I thought I heard her voice one last time, faint, almost affectionate. "Remember." And I do. Every time I camp alone now, I still listen for her. The spirit wind of Deschutes, the whisper that taught me some places don't want to be understood, only respected. For weeks after I got back home to Redmond, I couldn't shake the sound of the wind from my head. It wasn't just memory, it was presence. Some nights I'd wake up to find the curtains by my bed shifting, though the windows were sealed shut. I told myself it was nothing. The brain holding on to stress, maybe the tail end of some sleep disorder. But deep down, I knew that wind hadn't stayed behind in the Deschutes. It had followed me home. I tried to return to normal life. My work as a freelance mechanic kept me busy enough, and I told my friends I just had a weird camping trip. Nothing more. But every time I passed a stand of pines or heard a gust slide between rooftops, I'd feel that same pressure building behind my ribs, like the forest was breathing through me. A month after I left, I drove back to the ranger station near Crescent Junction. I needed to make sense of what had happened. I found Ranger Marie Hensley, an older woman who'd worked the district for decades. When I told her where I'd camped, her expression changed. "You went past the winter gate?" she said, setting down her mug. I nodded. I had permission from a friend. I didn't think. "You went near Wickiup?" she interrupted. "Near the east side off 9710? "Yeah, about a mile in." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not a good place to camp alone. Locals call it Whispering Bend." I asked her why. She hesitated for a long time before speaking. "There was a wildfire there in the 1960s. Started from a lightning strike, burned for 3 days straight. 2 volunteer rangers stayed behind to keep the flames from crossing the reservoir, a husband and wife. They managed to save the forest, but the wind changed fast that night. They never made it out. People say the woman's voice still rides the currents through the pines. They call her the spirit wind." The words hit harder than I expected. "Her husband?" I asked quietly. "They found him, burned but near the road. She was never recovered. They buried a carved totem in her honor so her spirit would rest. Nobody's touched it in decades. I sat there, cold spreading through me. That totem's gone, I said. I moved it. Marie's eyes sharpened. You moved it? I didn't know what it was. It was half buried. I picked it up and things started happening. She leaned back slowly, staring past me as if she were seeing something else entirely. Then it's awake again. I wanted to laugh, to deny it, but her tone killed the impulse. Awake? She nodded. The stories say if the spirit wind feels disturbed, she comes back to remind people what the forest cost her, sometimes gently, sometimes not. I left the station shaken. The logic in me, the part that believes in engines and fuel lines and what can be fixed with tools, fought against the part that had stood in that clearing watching a dead woman step into firelight. That night, I dreamed of her again, but this time, she wasn't angry. She was standing by the reservoir at sunrise, the water smooth as glass behind her. She looked at me and said something I didn't understand, but I felt the meaning anyway. Gratitude, maybe, or release. Then she turned away and walked into the light. When I woke, my trailer smelled faintly of pine resin. The curtains were still, no wind, just silence. For a few months, life went quiet. I stopped camping, stayed close to home, told myself I'd had some kind of breakdown brought on by stress, but the longer I ignored it, the more restless I felt. There was a pull in me, a need to go back, not to chase fear, but to understand it. So the next spring, when the snow melted from the Cascade foothills, I drove back to Deschutes. I brought flowers, wild lupine and small white daisies I'd picked near the road, and I drove until the trees looked familiar again. I parked near the same turnoff and walked the last half-mile on foot. The forest had changed. The clearing was smaller now, overgrown with young saplings. The circle where the totem had been buried was covered in moss, the soil smooth, unbroken. The air was calm, still carrying that faint sweetness that seemed to live only there. I set the flowers down gently and stood for a while, listening. At first, there was nothing, no wind, no birds, no sound at all. Then, slowly, the pines began to stir. A soft rustle moved through them, almost like a sigh. It wasn't frightening this time. It was peaceful. I whispered, "I'm sorry." The wind rose slightly, swirling around me, brushing against my jacket and through my hair. It felt like a hand, cool, steady, almost kind. Then it faded again, leaving me in the stillness. When I turned to leave, something caught my eye near the base of a fallen log. A piece of wood, charred and carved, half hidden by ferns. I knelt and brushed it clean. It was the totem, or maybe a new one, I couldn't tell. The face was calm now, the mouth closed, eyes smooth and gentle. I left it there. Driving away, I felt lighter than I had in months. The forest didn't feel hostile anymore, just alive, aware, patient. But as I reached the highway and glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw the trees sway in perfect unison, though there was no breeze. Just once, a ripple through the canopy, like a final breath. That was last year. I haven't been back since, but the whisper still finds me now and then, not in fear, but in reminder. I'll be fixing an engine and feel a gust slide past, carrying the scent of resin and rain, and I'll stop, listen, and know she's still out there. People ask why I keep camping alone. They think it's loneliness or habit, but really, it's something else. It's respect. A promise to listen when the wild speaks, even if I don't understand. The Deschutes taught me that the forest is an empty space. It's memory, older than we can fathom, patient enough to forgive, but never to forget. And sometimes when the wind threads through the pines just right, I swear I still hear her voice, gentle, not warning anymore, just whispering across the air. You remember. And I always will. That winter, the nights in Redmond grew long and sharp, and I found myself listening for the wind again. Not out of fear, but something closer to longing. There was a comfort in that presence now, something grounding. Like every time the wind rustled through the pines outside my window, I knew I wasn't as alone as I used to feel. Grief, I've learned, doesn't only come from losing people. Sometimes it's from leaving behind the places that made you face yourself. That's what Deschutes did for me. Before that trip, I'd been drifting through life, fixing what was broken for others while ignoring everything broken inside me, my marriage, my sense of purpose, my faith in simple things. But standing in that forest, caught between the living and the unseen, I'd felt something I hadn't in years: connection. In the months after, I began volunteering with the Forest Service, mostly trail maintenance, nothing official, just small work. Clearing brush, hauling debris, patching signs. I didn't tell them why I'd started, only that I wanted to give back. Some days I'd catch myself pausing mid-work, listening to the trees sway, waiting for a sound that might never come again. But one afternoon in early spring, I was working a stretch near Paulina Creek when a gust passed through the canyon, strong enough to scatter pine needles like rain. I turned my head and heard a single, soft whistle roll through the trees. The same note that had started it all. It didn't scare me this time. I just stood there, smiling, and said quietly, "I'm still here." And I could have sworn for half a second the forest answered. That night, I drove up toward Crescent Lake and parked at an overlook that faced the far ridge of Deschutes. The horizon glowed faintly with dusk. The pines below formed an endless ripple of green, like the ocean caught mid-breath. I sat on the hood of the truck, letting the cold sink in, and realized that what had terrified me that autumn wasn't the spirit of the forest. It was the reflection of myself in it. The fear of being seen by something vast and honest. You spend enough time alone in the wild, you start to realize how much of life we build just to keep ourselves from listening to the quiet, to memory, to the truths we'd rather not face. Out there, the silence strips it all away. It leaves you bare, honest and afraid. But fear, I think, is just awareness sharpened by respect. When I finally left that night, I didn't say goodbye. Some places don't need farewells. They live in you long after you go. The spirit wind wasn't something to escape. It was something to carry. It's been a year now. Every so often, I still drive past the forest edge, roll down my window, and let the air move through the cab. Sometimes the wind hums low, steady. Other times it breaks into a tune only I seem to hear. A few weeks ago, I was parked along Route 97 when a storm rolled in fast from the Cascades. The sky turned the color of steel and the pines bent under the gusts, and there it was again, that same haunting, beautiful sound threading through the forest like a living breath. For a moment, it felt like everything, the forest, the sky, even my heartbeat, moved in rhythm. And in that rhythm, I heard the faintest echo. Remember. I whispered back, always. Because the truth is, the wind doesn't just move through the trees, it moves through us. It carries memory, the kind that doesn't fade, the kind that changes you. And every time the pine needles stir in the quiet, every time the forest exhales that long, soft breath that only Deschutes can, I know she's still there, watching, forgiving, reminding. Not a ghost, not a warning, just a whisper of what remains sacred in a world too quick to forget. Somewhere out there, beneath the endless canopy, the spirit wind still walks, through fog, through snowfall, through the hearts of those who listen. And when I close my eyes, I can feel her in the air again, not as fear, but as peace. A promise that the forest keeps its own kind of memory. The wind shifts, the pines murmur, and the earth holds its breath. Then, softly, like a sigh through time, I hear her one last time. You listened, and I smile, letting the sound fade into the dark. Because I did, and I always will. There's a quiet that lives out here in Oregon's forests, the kind you can't find anywhere else. It's not silence, it's something deeper, older. It's the breath between the trees, the echo between mountains. And every time I return to the Deschutes, even if it's just to drive along the edge of the pines, that quiet finds me again. It isn't haunting anymore. It's something closer to forgiveness. I've started bringing others out here now, people who've never camped before, who want to see the stars the way they look when you're 50 miles from the nearest town. I park the RV near the tree line, the same way I used to, but I never take them near Whispering Bend. That place isn't for stories told by firelight. It's for listening, for remembering. When people ask why I love these woods so much, I tell them it's because they teach you humility. Out here, you're not in charge. You're just another heartbeat moving through something ancient. And if you're lucky, if you stay quiet long enough, you start to feel that heartbeat pulsing beneath your own. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I'll step outside and listen to the wind press through the needles. It always starts soft, almost cautious, like the forest is testing the air. Then it builds, filling the night until it feels like the whole world is breathing in sync. That's when I hear her most clearly. Not words anymore, just a presence, the whispering pine song of something both wild and kind. There's a comfort in that, in knowing the line between fear and reverence is so thin. Because what I thought was dread that night by the reservoir wasn't dread at all. It was awe. The kind that only comes when you realize the world is alive in ways you can't control or explain. The forest didn't want me gone. It just wanted me to listen. Now, every person I take camping, I tell them the same thing when we settle in for the night. Don't try to own this place. Don't even try to understand it. Just listen. One evening not long ago, I brought a young couple out, first-time campers. They were city people, nervous, jumping at every creak of the trees. I watched them sit by the fire, laughing softly, trying to make the dark seem smaller. And as the night deepened, the wind began to move through the pines, slow and rhythmic. The sound shifted, that low, hollow hum that always makes the hairs on my arms stand up. The girl stopped talking mid-sentence. "What is that?" she whispered. "Just the wind," I said, smiling. "She's saying hello." The couple laughed nervously, thinking I was joking, but I wasn't. I knew that tone, that soft, spiraling current that rose and fell like breath. The spirit wind was near. Not angry, not restless, just passing through. When I woke the next morning, the air smelled faintly of sage and smoke, the same scent I'd first noticed years ago. And at the edge of camp, near the tree line, someone had arranged pine needles into a small spiral. Perfectly formed, right where the sunlight touched the ground. I didn't tell the others. I just stood there for a while, listening, and whispered, "Thank you." There's a lesson in that forest, one I think I'll spend the rest of my life trying to live by. That not everything sacred announces itself with thunder or terror. Sometimes it arrives as wind through branches, as a whisper you can't quite translate but still understand. Because some spirits don't want worship or fear. They want respect, acknowledgement, memory. The Deschutes still feels different from any other forest I've known. Its silence isn't empty. It's layered with history, with everything that's come and gone. And sometimes, if you stand still enough, you can almost feel it moving. The weight of all that memory pressing through the pines. It's not a ghost story anymore. It's a love story between the land and those who care enough to listen. I still camp alone sometimes, not to chase fear, but to find quiet. To hear the same whisper that found me years ago, when I was lost in more ways than one. And when that wind rises, when it moves through the trees with that soft, haunting melody, I know I'm right where I'm supposed to be. The spirit wind doesn't frighten me now. It reminds me to live differently, to move gently, to take only what I need, to remember that even silence has a voice. So when the pine boughs bend and the air shifts in that slow, ancient rhythm, I listen. I always listen, because somewhere, out beyond the reach of light, the forest still breathes. And in that breath, I hear her, faint, endless, eternal. And I whisper back into the night, I remember. The wind answers softly. A hush through the needles, like a heartbeat fading into forever. And then there's only quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels alive. There are nights I still wake up thinking about that light, how it hovered above the ridgeline, silent and impossibly still, like it was waiting for me to notice. It wasn't a dream, though for a long time I wished it was. I've camped alone most of my adult life, driven through nearly every state west of the Rockies in my old Volkswagen Westphalia. She's a faded teal 1984 model with a leaky roof vent and a dashboard that hums faintly whenever the radio's off. That van has been my refuge, my home, and my test of courage. But what happened near Mount Adams in Washington 2 summers ago, it changed the way I look at the sky and the way I trust silence. I'd been driving north from the Columbia River Gorge, taking the back roads that wind through old timber towns with boarded-up diners and rusted gas pumps still frozen at prices from the 80s. I liked it that way. Less traffic, fewer people, more time to let my mind breathe. I'd been going through a rough stretch back then. My dad had passed that spring, and the two of us used to fix old Volkswagens together. He was the one who taught me how to listen to an engine, not just hear it. When he died, the van became a kind of moving memorial. Every hum of the motor reminded me of him. I told myself I was camping to heal, but deep down I think I was trying to escape. Mount Adams had always fascinated me, its strange reputation, the rumors of lights seen hovering around it for decades, strange noises echoing through the timberline. I never believed any of that. I'm not the type to buy into UFO stories or conspiracies, but something about that area, so quiet, so isolated, felt magnetic. I planned to camp at a dispersed site near the Morrison Creek trailhead, a spot I'd found on a forum where old van lifers swapped GPS coordinates. A flat turnout surrounded by pines about a mile off the Forest Service road. Quiet, clean, remote, someone had written. Perfect view of the night sky. I reached it just before dusk. The last few miles were rough. Deep ruts, mud pockets, the kind of road that makes your suspension groan in protest. The forest felt thicker there, the trees crowding close to the road like they wanted to hide something behind them. I parked the van on a slight incline facing west, where through the trees I could see the distant glow of the sun dipping below the Cascades. The air smelled faintly of cedar and cold stone. I remember feeling calm as I set up camp, folding out the bed, lighting the old Coleman lantern, cracking a beer. It was one of those moments where solitude feels almost holy. But then came the hum. At first, I thought it was feedback from the van's old inverter, a low, vibrating note that made the rearview mirror buzz slightly. I unplugged everything, but the sound didn't stop. It wasn't mechanical. It felt atmospheric, like the forest itself was resonating. I stepped outside, thinking maybe I was hearing wind coming off the mountain. The trees were still. The air was perfectly calm, yet that faint hum persisted, deep and steady, more felt than heard. It faded after a minute or two, leaving behind a silence so heavy I could almost hear my heartbeat. I told myself it was probably distant logging equipment, or maybe a generator from another camper down the road, but when I checked, there was no one. Just darkness creeping in. The van glowing softly from the lantern light inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. The stars above Mount Adams were unreal, sharp, endless, like pinholes punched through black velvet. I kept the curtains open just to look at them, trying to let that stillness calm me. But around midnight, something shifted. I noticed a light moving, slowly, deliberately above the ridgeline. It wasn't an airplane. It didn't blink, and it didn't move in a straight path. It would glide, pause, then drift again. The longer I watched, the more I realized it wasn't illuminating the sky. It was casting a glow downward, like it was searching the ground. I stepped out of the van, barefoot on the cold dirt, and craned my neck to see. The light was maybe a mile away, maybe less. It was hard to judge distance in that blackness. It hung there, suspended in silence. I remember whispering to myself, "It's a drone," just to hear my own voice to make it sound rational. But drones have a certain sound, a whir, a mechanical whine, and this had nothing. Only that subtle hum, now faint but unmistakable, vibrating again through the air. Then the van's radio turned on. No music, no static, just a deep, soft tone. I froze, staring at the dashboard through the open side door. The dial light flickered, even though I hadn't touched the ignition. Then as suddenly as it started, it cut out. Silence again. My pulse was racing so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I stayed outside for a long time, scanning the sky. The light moved once more, closer now, just over the tree line, then stopped again. It was white, but not harsh. more like starlight concentrated into a single impossible point. I couldn't look away. Something in me, some quiet instinct said not to move, not to run, not to make a sound. After maybe 30 seconds, the light lifted straight up and vanished. No fade, no drift, just gone, as if someone had snuffed out a candle in the void. I waited there until my feet went numb from the cold, then climbed back into the van and locked every door. When I woke the next morning, the world looked completely ordinary. Sunlight spilling through pine needles, birds chattering, my breath fogging against the cold window glass. For a moment, I almost laughed at myself. But then I saw the condensation on the windshield. Circular smears, like fingerprints, but too large, too deliberate. Perfectly spaced, 5 marks in an arc, facing inward. I touched them, half expecting them to be on the outside. They weren't. The marks were inside the glass. I drove out that morning without breakfast, heart pounding the whole time. But the forest didn't want to let me go easy. About a mile down the road, the radio crackled back to life, even though the key was turned off. A single phrase whispered through the static. "Do you remember?" I swerved off the road, shaking so hard I could barely shift into park. The voice was low, genderless, calm. It repeated once, "Do you remember?" Then the line went dead. For the rest of that drive out, I couldn't shake the feeling that something above me was following, just out of sight. Every patch of open sky felt like exposure, every shadowed stretch of trees like refuge. I didn't stop driving until I hit the edge of Trout Lake, a small town about 20 miles from the base of Mount Adams. I parked outside a closed diner and sat there, engine off, trying to slow my breathing. People were walking dogs, kids were riding bikes. It looked like any other summer morning in the Cascades. Yet I couldn't stop glancing up, half expecting that light to be there again. But the strangest part came that afternoon when I finally worked up the nerve to look through my camera. I'd left it on the dash overnight, recording a time-lapse of the stars. The video played normally for the first few hours, just still stars wheeling across the night sky. Then, around midnight, a faint glow entered the frame. The light I'd seen. Only when it paused above the trees, the lens caught something else. Brief, like static interference, a shape just for a few frames. A circular outline, darker than the sky, and in the middle what looked like an eye. Perfectly round, faintly reflective. And it wasn't looking at the mountain, it was looking at me. I must have replayed that footage 100 times before I realized my hands were shaking. Every time I paused it on that frame, that shape seemed to stare straight through the glass, straight into the camera lens. The rational part of my mind fought it tooth and nail. Lens flare, digital artifact, dust. I tried all of them as explanations. But something in me knew, deep down, that whatever that thing was, it wasn't just light. It saw me. And the longer I stared at that paused frame, the more I began to feel the echo of that low hum again. Faint, but unmistakable, like memory vibrating in my bones. I told myself I was overreacting, packed up, grabbed a greasy burger from the only open diner in town, and tried to move on. The cook, an older man with deep lines on his face and a faded baseball cap that read "Go Cougs," asked where I was coming from. I told him the Morrison Creek area, up near Mount Adams. His expression froze just long enough for me to notice. Then he smiled too quickly. "Beautiful up there," he said. "Not many people camp alone, though. You see any lights?" That stopped me cold. "Why would you ask that?" He shrugged, wiping his hands on a rag. "People around here talk. Always something up on that mountain, military stuff, experimental drones, who knows? My brother swears he saw one last summer, hovering over his pasture. Dogs went crazy. Power cut out for hours." He laughed as if to play it off, but his eyes didn't join in. There was something else in them, a flicker of recognition, like he was testing me to see if I'd admit what I'd seen. I told him I'd just come for the stars, that maybe I'd picked up some interference on my van radio. He nodded slowly, not pressing. When I got back outside, my Volkswagen felt different. Not unsafe, just watched. The reflection of the diner sign glowed faintly on the windshield, that right over those faint arcs I'd seen that morning. I tried wiping them again. Nothing came off. The rest of that day, I drove aimlessly through Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, taking roads that curved endlessly through old-growth cedar and moss-draped hemlock. The sky was overcast, a dull silver light filtering through the canopy. I told myself I'd find another campsite closer to civilization, maybe near Trout Lake Creek, just for one more night before heading home. But by evening, I'd somehow circled back toward the mountain. The road signs didn't match what my GPS said. I kept turning toward towns that never appeared. My sense of direction, usually sharp, felt scrambled. By dusk, I was back in the forest, parked beside a creek I didn't recognize. The place was eerily quiet. No birds, no bugs, just the soft burble of water and the creak of trees shifting in the breeze. I checked my phone. No signal. The temperature dropped fast. I should have left then. I should have trusted that tightness in my gut, that instinct my dad always said to never ignore. But part of me, some strange, compulsive part, wanted to understand. I needed to see that light again, to know what it was, to prove to myself that it was something explainable. Fear does that sometimes. It disguises itself as curiosity. As darkness settled, I climbed into the back of the van, unrolled my sleeping bag, and tried to relax. I left the curtains half open, telling myself it was for the view. But truthfully, I couldn't stand not being able to see outside. I wanted to know if it came back. Around midnight, I woke to that hum again. Not loud, subtle, like a current moving through the air. My body knew before my mind did. I sat up, pulse thudding in my throat, and looked out the side window. The trees glowed faintly white. Not like moonlight. This was sharper, directional, as if someone had turned on a spotlight in the distance. The light moved slowly, sweeping across the forest, each trunk casting a long, thin shadow that seemed to waver in slow motion. When the beam passed over the van, the metal creaked softly, the way it does in extreme cold. I didn't breathe. The glow stopped just beyond the creek. That's when I heard it. Tapping. Soft, deliberate, like fingertips brushing the metal just above the windshield. Once, twice, then a pause. Then again. I leaned forward, every nerve on fire. The tapping came again, this time near the roof vent. The hum deepened. The air inside the van felt thick, almost charged. My skin tingled as though the entire vehicle were vibrating at a frequency just below hearing. Then the lights on the dash flickered, once, twice, and the radio came on by itself. No words this time, just that same tone, long and steady. It rose in pitch, almost imperceptibly, until it matched the frequency of the hum outside. The two sounds merged into a single vibration that made the mirrors quiver. I clamped my hands over my ears, but I could still feel it in my skull, in my teeth. Then silence. For a long moment, nothing. The hum was gone. The tapping had stopped. The forest lay still again, drenched in black. And then, without warning, the van's headlights flicked on. I gasped and spun around, but the keys were still hanging from the hook above the stove. The beams shot straight into the forest, illuminating nothing but the drifting fog over the creek. But in that pale fog, just at the edge of where the light faded, I saw movement. Something shifting between the trees, slow, deliberate. Too tall to be human, too smooth to be animal. It moved closer, just enough for me to see its outline, a narrow shape, featureless, but somehow aware. It didn't walk, it glided, like it was sliding through water. And when it reached the edge of the headlight's reach, it stopped. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Me frozen inside, it motionless outside. Then, almost imperceptibly, it lifted something that could have been an arm. The light reflected off its surface, metallic, mirror-like, and then it pointed. Upward. I followed its gesture. Above the trees, just visible through the canopy, hung that same white light. Closer than before. Not a spotlight. Not a drone. A sphere, luminous and silent, floating perfectly still. And at its center, faintly visible, that same dark shape, the eye. It pulsed once, and the hum returned, deep and resonant. The figure outside lowered its arm and dissolved, literally dissolved into the fog, like it had never been there at all. I slammed the keys in the ignition and tore down that dirt road faster than I ever should have. The van bucked and rattled, gravel clattering off the wheel wells, headlights bouncing wildly off trees. But the light followed. I could see it through the branches, pacing me, weaving effortlessly through the forest canopy. At one point, the hum grew so loud that the windows began to vibrate. My rearview mirror blurred from the shaking. Then, as I crested a ridge, the light shot upward, so fast it became a streak, and vanished into the clouds. The silence that followed was unreal. My ears rang. My chest ached. I drove until I hit asphalt again, somewhere near Glenwood, then pulled over and sat in the dark for nearly an hour before I realized I was crying. I didn't understand what I'd seen, but something in me had shifted, like a piece of my life had been quietly rearranged while I wasn't looking. That night, I didn't sleep. I just kept replaying those words from the radio. Do you remember? And the terrifying part was, somewhere deep down, I felt like I did. For weeks after I left Mount Adams, I tried to convince myself that it had been exhaustion, grief, or some kind of breakdown. When you spend too long alone on the road, you start to lose track of what's real and what's just your mind echoing against itself. I told people I'd just had some weird electrical issues with the van, though I couldn't bring myself to explain what kind of issues. I didn't even look at the footage again for months. But there's a strange thing about fear. When it's deep enough, it doesn't fade. It waits. It watches for a quiet moment, then it whispers again. By fall, I'd parked the van behind my small rental in Bend, Oregon. I stopped camping altogether. The sound of wind in trees made my stomach twist. At night, I sometimes caught myself glancing up at the sky, not for stars, but for movement. Even the faint hum of power lines would make my hands clench. I kept the curtains drawn tight, always. Then one night, about 2 months after Mount Adams, I woke up to a faint light moving across my ceiling. Not a street light, not passing car headlights. It moved too slowly. I pulled back the curtain, and for a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. Hanging silently above the cul-de-sac was that same pale sphere, not bright enough to wake the neighbors, just bright enough for me to see. It drifted once, pulsed, then vanished behind the clouds. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I drove the van straight to my dad's old friend, Mark, a mechanic in town who knew every inch of these Volkswagens. I told him the electrical system was acting up, that the radio came on by itself, that the headlights flickered. He pulled it into the shop, hooked up his meters, checked every fuse. After an hour, he came out frowning. "Everything's fine," he said. "Actually, cleaner than I'd expect for this age. No shorts, no drain. You sure it wasn't just a low battery?" I just nodded. I didn't have words. That evening, when I picked it up, Mark handed me the keys and said quietly, "You know, your dad used to talk about that mountain too. Said he saw something up there in '87 when he took a hunting trip with your uncle. Lights in the sky. Thought it was Air Force tests." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The world felt smaller after that, like there were threads tying me to something I didn't understand. Winter came. I started driving again, short weekend trips just to clear my head. But wherever I went, the Oregon coast, the desert, the high passes east of Sisters, I kept noticing small, impossible things. My compass needle twitching when there was no wind, my radio tuning itself to blank frequencies, emitting that same soft tone. Once I woke in a rest area at 3 a.m. and found condensation on the windshield again. 5 arcs, perfect as before, facing inward. That was when I decided to go back. It wasn't courage. It was necessity. Some part of me believed I'd left something unfinished there. Maybe an explanation, maybe a warning. I packed carefully this time. Extra batteries, a hand crank radio, a decent camera. Before I left, I wrote a note and left it taped under my desk. If I don't come back, check the van. I reached Mount Adams in early April. Snow still clung to the shaded gullies, but the forest roads were clear enough to drive. I took the same route, slowly, deliberately, until I found that turnout near Morrison Creek again. The trees looked different somehow, older, more twisted. The air had that metallic tang that comes before lightning, though the sky was clear. I parked in the same spot. The engine ticked as it cooled. The silence pressed in. As darkness fell, I set up my camera on the dash again, same time-lapse setting as before. I wanted proof. I needed to know that what I'd seen hadn't been imagined. The temperature dropped, breath fogging the windshield. I sat in the driver's seat with the radio off, headlights off, everything dead quiet. Around 11, the hum started. This time, I didn't flinch. I just listened. It wasn't coming from the forest. It was beneath me. The ground itself seemed to vibrate, like the earth was breathing slow and deep. I stepped outside, boots crunching on frost, and looked toward the ridge. The light was there. Same altitude, same impossible stillness. But now there were two. One faint, one brighter. They pulsed, alternating rhythmically, like they were communicating. Then the radio inside the van came on. I turned. The glow from the dashboard flickered, and that same phrase came through the static. Do you remember? But this time, something followed it. We were here before. My throat closed. I couldn't move. The words repeated, softer, almost sorrowful. Then the tone shifted, an ascending pitch that seemed to draw the air out of my lungs. That's when the forest around me began to change. The shadows lengthened, bending upward as if gravity itself had tilted. The pines shimmered with faint halos of light, their trunks rippling like reflections in water. I felt weightless, my body caught between fear and surrender. Above me, the brighter sphere drifted lower, its glow washing over the clearing until every surface, metal, bark, skin, gleamed with cold luminescence. For the first time I saw it clearly. The eye wasn't a shape inside the light. It was the light, an iris of pure radiance, alive and shifting, contracting as it focused. And as it did, images flickered through my mind, flashes of places I'd never been, deserts, ice fields, oceans seen from far above. Then suddenly, a memory that wasn't a memory at all. I saw myself as a child, sitting beside my father's workbench. The radio was playing softly, and outside the window, a faint light hovered in the dusk. My father was staring at it, motionless. He turned toward me and said something I'd long forgotten, something that now echoed back with perfect clarity. If you ever see it too, don't be afraid. It's not new. My knees buckled. I hit the dirt, breath ragged, tears stinging. The light above me pulsed once more, so bright it turned night to day, then shot upward, vanishing without sound. The hum stopped. When I came to, dawn was breaking. My van was covered in frost. The camera on the dash had drained completely, though the battery had been full. I played it back anyway. The footage was blank, just white static, except for the last few seconds. Just before the file cut off, there was an image, so brief it almost wasn't there. A view of the clearing, the van, the mountain behind it, and high above, a faint shape watching. Not a sphere this time, a ring, and inside that ring, something looking back down. I drove home that day, silent the entire way. I didn't tell anyone where I'd been. For weeks afterward, the radio in the van stayed silent. No hums, no voices, nothing. It was as if the mountain had finally let me go. But every now and then, when I drive at night and the road opens wide beneath a sky full of stars, I feel it again, the quiet pressure, the pulse beneath the air. And I think about my dad, about that night in the shop, about the way he stared out the window. Maybe he'd seen it too. Maybe we all have in one form or another. The thing that watches, the thing that remembers. I still camp sometimes, though never near Mount Adams. I park the van in open places where the stars are bright and the air feels clean. I tell myself I'm not afraid anymore. But when the wind goes still and the forest grows too quiet, I can feel the memory stirring like static beneath my skin. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear it. Do you remember? And I whisper back into the dark, yes.